A hush had fallen across the far northern forest. One by one, the leaves of the towering weirwoods stopped their trembling, as though waiting for a whisper that had yet to cross their branches. The moss underfoot felt damp, spongy, and oddly alive. A single child of the forest crept between the trees, nearly blending into the mottled colors of bark and foliage, golden eyes darting warily. Though the dark of night had well and truly settled on the land beyond, within this sacred grove there was a faint greenish glow. For centuries, no mortal foot save perhaps a ranger's had pressed this far into the old forest. But the children moved with an easy familiarity that belied the centuries since they had been many, since they had thrived here. She was called Nailia by her kin, and her heart fluttered under the soft bark and leaf armor that clothed her slight form. She was young by the standards of the children of the forest, a flickering candle of a life measured against the ages of her elders. But in a time as dire as this, her youth and irrepressible spirit would be needed. The forests were no longer safe. Winds moaned across the mountains, carrying the ice-bladed whispers of something monstrous. Reports traveled in half-remembered dream visions. The Night King stirred again. The White Walkers roamed beyond the wall, gathering whites and sowing nightmares. Men had grown arrogant or complacent. Only a handful believed the stories of the others. Only a handful prepared. It fell, in part, to the children to do what must be done when the north faced the possibility of final darkness. Nailia paused at the base of a grand weirwood, its ancient trunk thick as a city wall, face carved ages ago with eyes that glimmered red in the gloom. This was one of the oldest living things in the world. Its branches spread out like a watchful canopy, as though it were the silent witness to all the tragedies and triumphs that had ever unfurled in the north. For a moment she listened, ear pressed to the thick bark. She heard a long, slow heartbeat, as though the tree itself breathed. The children had always shared a special bond with weirwoods, especially those that had been carved with faces by her earliest ancestors. Even now, as her small palm touched the trunk, she felt the swirling echo of centuries inside its wood, echoes that whispered of an ancient conflict long before the first men had arrived, a conflict that had taught the children certain secrets none else could know. They had once used those secrets in a desperate hour, before the wall was raised. When the long night had seemed endless, they had shaped the land's magic and given birth to a powerful being, a harbinger of terror. Some said they had inadvertently had a hand in the making of the Night King's kind, forging power they never meant to hand over to something so cruel and twisted. Now, to face that same threat, the children needed to take a bold risk again. But this time they would be more cautious. This time they would create a being of pure flame and scale, incorruptible by ice and darkness, a protector rather than a destroyer. It would be a dragon of the forests making born of roots and leaves and ancient spells, shaped by the same primal power that let the weirwoods see beyond mortal sight. And it would belong not to men or Targaryens but to the children of the forest. An elemental beast immune to the chill necrosis of the White Walkers and impervious to the Night King's dominion. Nailia drew in a shuddering breath. Her heart hammered in her chest. She had spent endless days and nights learning the incantations from her elders, those few who had survived from the age of heroes or had at least learned from those who had. To muster that knowledge was not without risk. The last time the children had tried to harness such power had ended in blood and heartbreak. But as ice spread, as rumors of the dead rising in a distant land beyond the wall filtered even here, they had no choice. Better to risk everything than submit to an endless night. She crept into a clearing where 3 other children waited, each wearing an expression of subdued resolve. One stood wrapped in a dark green cloak of woven leaves, face thin and hawk-like, if a child's face could ever be hawk-like. Another wore a bark breastplate etched with runes so old Nailia could barely read them, though she had studied the old tongue all her life. The third, an ancient female with hair that seemed fashioned from living vines, cradled a bowl of some shimmering liquid in her hands. There was no firelight in this clearing, only the faint luminescence that came from the weirwood's presence and the swirl of magic in the air. Nailia joined the circle they formed. She sank to her knees, her breath trembling. This was the hour. The air around them vibrated with anticipation and something akin to dread. Each child extended a hand toward the center of their small circle where a patch of black earth looked freshly turned. The ground within that ring had been carefully prepared, an intricate arrangement of runic stones pressed in patterns around a shallow pit. Even the wind seemed hushed, as though frightened to blow across that unholy or perhaps sacred spot. The ancient female, called Ahara, bowed her head, and her voice came out in a language older than speech itself, a series of resonant clicks and melodic hums that resonated in the souls of all who heard it. Nailia felt it reverberate in the pit of her stomach. The words called upon the old gods, the spirits of the forest, the weirwoods, and all the living heart of the land. They invited ancient forces to come forth and dwell in this place. As Ahara spoke, the shimmering liquid in the bowl began to swirl with its own faint glow, pale green in color, reminiscent of wildfire but lacking its malice, instead carrying a calm, dignified power. When Ahara finished the incantation, she poured the liquid into the pit. It soaked into the earth in a hiss of steam. Tendrils of glowing vapor curled upward, winding around Nailia and the others, leaving behind an aroma like petrichor and new blossoms. Then the runic stones along the pit's rim began to glow. The hawk-faced child, named Ril, spoke next in a voice that quavered slightly despite his determination. He wove the next lines of the incantation, calling upon the memory of forgotten times, calling on the unity once shared between the children and the earliest dragons, if indeed such a bond had ever existed in the dawn of the world. The magic rose in intensity, humming like a distant thunder in Nailia's ears. She thought of how improbable it sounded. Forging a dragon from earth and weirwood magic. Dragons were born of fire and scale, illusions and terror. They belonged to the sky, to flame. The Targaryens believed their heritage entwined with dragons. Yet the children had known of dragons long before the Valyrians first tamed them. Perhaps the true origin of those majestic creatures stretched farther back than men realized. If there was a spark of the forest's power somewhere in them, might that spark be fanned into life again, shaped into a new entity that answered only to the children? The black earth within the circle trembled. First it rippled like water, then it sank in on itself. A faint green glow, the color of living plants in bright sun, rose from below. The swirling vapor condensed into shapes that twisted and turned, forming something like bones. Not ordinary bones of flesh and blood, but branches that interlocked, forging a skeletal outline reminiscent of a great winged lizard. Nailia's pulse raced. It was working. She could feel the energy surging through her, and she clutched her chest. Ril's voice held steady, forging the next phrases, calling the shape to completion, weaving into it the enchantments that would keep it from the chill of the White Walker's power. At that point, the one with the bark breastplate, Celeria, stepped forward. She began chanting in another dialect of the old tongue, calling upon the forest's flame, the hidden glow beneath the weirwood's bark, the vital heat that lived in every root and leaf. Her voice soared. Each time her tone rose, the shape in the earth responded, taking on new detail. Sinuous ridges emerged along the back of the skeletal trunk. A vaguely reptilian skull formed at the top of a long neck. Wings, formed from spindles of glimmering bark, spread out on either side. Nailia's own voice joined the chanting. Every word an invitation for life. An invitation to a new being to join the living world. From the corners of her eyes, Nailia saw the forest itself turning toward them. Leaves trembled again, not in fear, but in reverent wonder. Small woodland creatures peered out from hollows, drawn by the magic. She caught glimpses of luminous green eyes in the shadows, perhaps more children, or maybe the curious spirits that had never abandoned this land. The swirl of glowing vapor around the skeletal shape intensified, condensing into a shimmering membrane that would serve as flesh and scale. This was no ordinary draconic hide. It had patterns like swirling leaves tinted with deep green and flecks of gold. When it sparkled, it looked like the sun shining through a lush canopy. The words of the chant rushed faster and faster until they merged into a single, resonant tone that spilled from every child's throat. The old runic stones glowed bright, the ground itself cracked, and faint tongues of green flame licked up along the forming dragon's limbs. A final surge of that unearthly power pulsed through Nailia's chest, leaving her breathless. She felt as if something had reached inside her and taken a piece of her soul as a seed for this new creation. But she did not resist. This was the cost of forging life from magic. She gave of herself, heart and spirit, hoping it would be enough. Then, silence. The entire forest went still. The runic glow flickered and faded. The swirling vapor vanished, leaving behind a shape that lay in the shallow pit, curled like a sleeping hatchling, though it was the size of a small horse. Moments passed. Nailia wondered if their attempt had failed. Her chest ached with the aftershock of the spell. Her vision swam. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came. One golden eye blinked open on that newly formed creature. The eye shone as though lit from within by living embers. Its pupils stretched and contracted, adjusting to the dim light of the clearing. Then the other eye opened. Slowly, the dragon, if it could be called that, lifted its head, and Nailia drew in a sharp breath. Green membranes spread across its wings, patterned with swirling veins like a leaf. Its hide was as dark as the bark of an ancient oak, shot through with glimmers of gold. Small horns sprouted along its brow and down its neck, reminiscent of gnarly, twisting branches. It let out a breath, which came as a soft hiss that rose into a note that sounded oddly like the forest wind. Then that hiss erupted into a low roar, not quite thunderous in volume yet, but carrying a sense of deep, nascent power. The children exchanged astonished, hopeful looks. Ehara carefully approached, one hand extended. The new dragon, lying prone, turned its gleaming eyes on her. Nailia watched, heart in her throat, as the dragon reached out with its snout to sniff Ehara's hand. Magic pulsed at the point of contact, a swirl of green luminescence dancing over the creature's muzzle. Then Ehara lowered her hand, overcame her trembling, and stroked the dragon's brow. For a moment, the newly wrought being exhaled something like steam. Then it rose, unfolding limbs with a grace that suggested a swift predator waiting to be unleashed. Nailia felt tears prick at her eyes. Here stood their greatest hope. The children had woven wards into its very flesh to repel the chill of the others. They had bound the essence of the weirwoods to its heart, granting it a connection to the ancient trees that transcended mortal magic. The Night King, with all his might, would find no puppet in this beast. The specter of the White Walker's chill corruption would fizzle against the living flame that flowed in its veins. And the world changed in that heartbeat. For the first time in millennia, the children of the forest had birthed a new power into the realm. An incorruptible dragon, one that belonged not to men, not to the Targaryens or Valyrians of old, but to the land itself, its watchers and protectors. All that remained was to guide it, nurture it, and prepare it for the war to come. Nailia stayed in the clearing with the dragon while the elders conferred in hushed tones. She could almost sense their debate. They had done what once seemed impossible, created a living dragon from the forest's magic. Yet 1,000 questions remained. Would it breathe the flame of the typical dragon, or something different? How swiftly would it grow? Could they hide it from the ravens and spies of men? The forest might be vast, but rumors spread quickly, especially about winged beasts. More importantly, how would they call upon it when the hour came to confront the Night King? There was too much to consider. But the immediate reality hushed her concerns. The dragon gazed at her with those ember-like eyes, seemingly as curious about her as she was about it. When she ventured close, it let out a rumble that might have been a purr. Slowly, she placed a palm on its chest, feeling the steady thrum of its heart. There was the warmth of flame in that scaled flesh, but also a comforting softness as though leaves cushioned every ridge. The dragon's tail flicked, stirring dead leaves in the clearing. Night enveloped them. The green glow faded as the runic circle spent its power. Stars emerged overhead, glimpsed through the tangle of branches. The forest collectively exhaled in the hush that followed. Nailia whispered a small prayer of thanks to the old gods, to the weirwood, to whatever guiding force had overseen this miracle. Somewhere far to the north, the White Walkers advanced. But here in this small clearing, a new dawn had been born, one that might illuminate the darkest night. When the elders finished their private council, Ehara beckoned Nailia to join them. The old child's voice was almost lost in the hush of the glade. "You have a role to play," she said. "We sense this dragon's bond is strongest with you. You gave much of your spirit to see it born. You may be the one who must guide it." Nailia's eyes widened. She had never considered herself important, only a conduit for the magic. "Me," she breathed. Rill nodded, features etched with an uneasy solemnity. "We are few in number," he said. "We cannot risk leaving this place entirely undefended. But the White Walkers will come, perhaps sooner than we think. Our watchers in the far north have seen them stirring. If men do not unite, if the realms do not heed the warnings, the long night may fall again. And only this 1 inch," he glanced at the dragon, "stands a chance to tip the balance. Then we must strike first," said Celeria. "Or at least ensure that when we do strike, it will matter." She folded her hands and glanced at Nailia. "Child, we will need your courage. You must learn to ride this new creature, or at the very least guide it. It answers to your spirit." Nailia's heart fluttered with equal parts fear and determination. She turned to regard the dragon once more. Its bright eyes mirrored the forest spirit as though it were a living extension of everything green and growing. In that gaze, Nailia felt an unspoken promise that it would not fail her, nor would it fail the forest. She gave a trembling nod. "I'll do what I can." So began Nailia's days of bonding with the forest dragon. She did not name it at first. Among the children of the forest, names carried power, and one had to be certain. The creature followed her through the winding paths of the wood, tested its wings in small bursts of flight above the treetops, and slaked its thirst in cool woodland pools. Its breath smelled like petrichor and sap, its roars echoed with the resonance of wind through branches. At night, it curled around her in a protective circle while she slept on a bed of leaves. She taught it the gentleness of the forest, coaxing it not to crush saplings or tear up the soil. Yet she also coaxed forth its fierce side. If it was meant to face whites and white walkers, it had to learn to channel its own brand of flame. Its body heat alone seemed to radiate a mild, greenish glow in the darkness. She discovered the dragon's flame the first time it felt threatened by a passing shadow cat. With a sudden snarl, it exhaled not red-orange fire but a swirl of emerald flame that crackled like leaves in a bonfire, scorching the ground in a wide arc and chasing off the predator instantly. The flame burned strangely, almost cold to the touch for living beings, but devastating to anything of ice or necromantic origin, so Celeria and Ahara explained. It was the forest's flame, a cosmic inversion of the cold that animated the dead. To living creatures, it caused little lasting harm unless the dragon wished it so, but to anything cursed by the White Walkers, it would be anathema. Still, as time passed, rumors began to drift toward them. Rangers from the Night's Watch roamed the edges of the forest. Hunters and wildlings pressed south. Whispers said the dead were rising in small raiding parties. Ahara listened to the quiet voices carried through the weirwood network, those psychic murmurs that the children shared. It was growing worse. The White Walkers were on the move, attacking unprepared villages, swelling their ranks of undead. And in the far north, the dreaded Night King was rumored to ride an undead dragon of pale blue flame. Even the southern kingdoms had begun to hear scattered reports. The children could not remain idle. Though they were secretive by nature and had learned to avoid men, times demanded alliances. Yet so many men had forgotten or dismissed the children's existence or the threat of the others. Nailia listened to Ahara's laments. So little time. So few resources. The dragon perched beside them as if to say, "We are not powerless. We must act." At length, it was decided that Nailia and a handful of others would journey beyond the forest, perhaps as far as the wall, to take stock of the situation themselves. They would hide the dragon when possible, but let it be seen if it served to prove the seriousness of this threat. If men refused to believe in the White Walkers, perhaps the appearance of an impossible new dragon would at least open their minds to other wonders and terrors. That was the hope. It was with a trembling heart that Nailia prepared to leave the forest that had always been her home. She had ventured out before on small scouting trips, but never with a mission so grand. The forest had sheltered her, taught her, fed her. Now she would be exposed to the wide world, traveling roads that men trod, stepping into realms of suspicion and conflict. Yet for the sake of all living beings, she knew she had to. The White Walkers threatened not just men, but every living creature under the sun. The day before she departed, she named her dragon. She stood before it at sunset, the dying light painting the clearing in gold and green. The creature seemed to sense her intention. It lowered its head, gently pushing its snout against her shoulder. She rested her forehead against its scaled muzzle and spoke the name softly, Avarix. It was a word from the oldest dialect known to the children, meaning the living root of flame. The dragon rumbled in approval, a deep sound that resonated in her chest. From that moment, their bond was sealed in name as well as spirit. At first light, Nailia, Ril, and Celeria set out AC. Accompanied by Avarix. Ahara and a few others remained behind, guardians of the Weirwood Grove and the hidden enclaves of the children. They carried little in the way of supplies, for the children could live off roots and berries easily. But they did carry small seeds in pouches, seeds of weirwoods and lesser trees. They carried them as symbols of hope and to remind themselves of home. Avarix took flight above them, gliding between the treetops, stirring morning mist into swirling patterns. Traveling by day, they soon reached the edges of the true forest where men had cut down massive tracts of wood to build their towns and fortresses. The boundary was stark as though the living forest recoiled from the realms of men. In the sky overhead, crows circled. Nailia noticed a few watchers on horseback in the distance. She kept herself hidden in the underbrush, motioning for her companions to do the same. Avarix alighted behind a cluster of pines, careful not to reveal himself. They did not wish to provoke an attack from frightened hunters. But stealth could only last so long. They needed news, and men were their best source. As they hovered on the edge of the forest, they glimpsed a small village, little more than a few huts and a muddy road. Smoke curled from chimneys. Children ran in the yard. Real human children, that is, for Nailia and her kin were something else entirely. Ril volunteered to approach, for he was the tallest among them, though still far shorter than a human man. He could possibly pass as an odd child or a small man with a cloak concealing his features. Celeria and Nailia would remain hidden, with Avarix deeper in the woods. The plan was to glean any news from travelers or villagers, then retreat before stirring trouble. Ril returned at dusk, face grave. He reported that caravans from the north spoke of white walkers creeping beyond the wall. The Night's Watch had sent out urgent ravens begging the southern lords for aid. But the southern kingdoms were fractured, some fighting petty wars among themselves, others calling the tales exaggerations. Meanwhile, the Night King had supposedly turned a dragon undead, though some questioned if that was only rumor, for no proof had been brought south. Either way, panic brewed in the smallfolk. They told stories around fires of ice shining blue in the night and entire hamlets found empty with only frozen footprints left in the snow. Hearing that news filled Nailia's veins with ice. There was no time to waste. They needed to head north, see for themselves the state of the wall, possibly speak with the Night's Watch. Maybe those black-clad guardians still recalled their old alliances with the children of the forest. After all, it was said the children had aided Bran the Builder in raising the wall so long ago. Now that the threat was returning, perhaps the Watch would welcome them or at least accept their help. They traveled along hidden paths that skirted around villages, occasionally glimpsing men from a distance. Rumors spread that a dragon was in the region, but no one could confirm. Some farmers swore they saw a great winged beast overhead, shimmering green in the moonlight, but others scoffed. Dragons were for Targaryen legends or the east, not the north. Yet in quiet corners fear mounted. More caravans of refugees fled south. Nailia and her companions pressed against the tide of frightened souls, creeping always northward. One evening, as they huddled beneath the boughs of an evergreen, they heard distant horns echo across the plain. War horns, or perhaps signals from the Night's Watch. The ground had grown colder, patches of frost appeared even though the season was not yet winter. A sense of looming dread accompanied the night wind. Avarix seemed agitated, pacing in a circle, occasionally releasing a quiet rumble. The forest itself felt uneasy, the branches trembled in a wind that smelled faintly of decay. The next morning, they came upon a grisly scene, a small settlement, its walls partially torn down, the huts inside ravaged by some destructive force. No living soul remained. Here and there, footprints dotted the frozen mud, footprints that seemed elongated, not made by living men. The stench of death hung over it all, though the bodies were suspiciously few. Likely, the White Walkers had turned them into whites. Nailia trembled, thinking of how unstoppable the others seemed when their ranks grew. She silently vowed that the newly created forest dragon would not be too late. As they moved on from that place of horror, the cold sank deeper. Eventually, the wall loomed on the horizon like a distant mountain of ice, impossibly high and forbidding. The sky around it was a pale, washed-out gray, as though sunlight itself shrank away from those cold battlements. They circled wide to approach Castle Black, or whichever gate might still be manned. Before they emerged from cover, Ril said, "We must decide. Do we reveal ourselves openly to the Night's Watch? They might try to kill us on sight or shoot down Avarix in fear." Celeria's face was set. "We have no choice. If we are to form any alliance, we must risk it. Otherwise, what point in coming so far?" They found a vantage point from behind a series of icy boulders. The gates of Castle Black stood closed, but not entirely. Guards patrolled the top of the wall. Occasionally, a black-clad figure strode across the courtyard. No horns blared. No sign of immediate battle. The watchers on the ice walkway stared north as though awaiting an enemy that might come at any moment. Nailia's heart ached. She remembered stories of men's bravery in the old days. The Night's Watch had once stood proud, thousands strong, to guard the realms of men. Now it was a shadow of its former glory. They might have only a few hundred men left, if that. The living would need far more to stand against an army of the dead. "Let us go on foot," said Nailia, her voice soft. "Avarix will remain hidden behind these rocks. If we earn the Watch's trust, we'll bring him forth." With that plan, Nailia, Ril, and Celeria walked openly across the barren stretch of land that led to the gate. Immediately horns sounded from the battlements. Shouts echoed. Archers appeared along the parapets, bows at the ready. Nailia did her best not to flinch. She raised her hands, stepping carefully forward. The watchmen, pale-faced from the cold, looked on in confusion and wariness. Children of the forest were no everyday sight. Some might have thought them only myths or long-dead relics. Yet here they stood, living proof of the forest's oldest inhabitants. "Hold," came a voice from above. "Stay your ground." Nailia froze. The watchers conferred in hurried tones. Finally, the gate creaked open a crack, and a group of men in black cloaks came out, swords and spears at the ready. One man with a lined face and a short beard stepped forward, regarding them cautiously. "What in the seven hells?" he muttered, trailing off. Then louder, "Identify yourselves." Rill inclined his head. "We are the children of the forest. We seek parley with the Night's Watch." The White Walkers rise again. "We come to offer our help." The men exchanged glances, uncertain. A few looked odd, others suspicious. Rumors of the children had floated around for centuries, but seldom had any actual sightings been confirmed. The man with the lined face gestured them forward. "Come inside slowly. Any sudden moves and my archers will shoot you down." "Understood." They nodded. The gate opened wide enough for them to pass. Inside, the courtyard was austere, the cold biting. The men of the watch, their eyes rimmed with fatigue, gathered to gawk. So few of them, Nailia thought. These men were tired, battered, and fighting a war of attrition. The line-faced man introduced himself as Ser Brandel, a steward-turned-commander after the watch's leadership had dwindled. He took them into a dim hall warmed by a single, meager fire. Over mugs of hot broth, he grilled them with questions. Where had they come from? How many more of their kind roamed the forest? What did they mean by help? Nailia and her companions spoke truthfully about the threat. They told Brandel of the rumor that the White Walkers had an undead dragon. They spoke of the ravaged villages. They claimed, in measured words, that the children might have a counter to that threat. They did not reveal the full truth yet, but they teased enough to pique Brandel's interest. At mention of an undead dragon, Brandel cursed under his breath. He had heard the rumor too, but no one believed it fully. Still, he did not outright dismiss them. The watchman had seen enough strange and terrible things to keep open minds. Eventually, Brandel said, "We've sent Raven after Raven south. We get no replies that promise real aid. The lords are preoccupied with their own feuds. A few promise to send men, but few arrive. Meanwhile, the whites probe our defenses. Usually small numbers, but more often now. We lost a patrol north of the wall last week. Found them afterward, or what was left of them. Some joined the enemy." A silence settled. Then Rill said softly, "Let us show you something. Outside the walls. It will not harm you." He glanced at Nailia. She took a steadying breath. The time had come to show them Avirix, if the watch would venture beyond their gates to see. The men exchanged worried looks, but Brandel gave a curt nod. He beckoned half a dozen black brothers to accompany them, fully armed. They walked out of Castle Black, skirting around to the place behind the rocky outcroppings. The watchmen had their weapons ready, glancing at every shadow. Nailia gently whistled, a lilting note she had taught the dragon to recognize. For a moment, nothing. Then the air stirred with the beating of powerful wings. The watchmen nearly jumped out of their skins. And then Avirix soared overhead, an arc of emerald and gold shimmering in the pale sky. He circled once, letting out a clarion cry that echoed off the wall, then landed. He folded his leaf-patterned wings close against his sides, the ground crunching under his claws. The watchman stared, jaws slack, stepping back in instinctive fear. "It's a dragon," one man breathed in disbelief. "A blasted dragon." "How?" muttered another. Nailia stood near Avrix's shoulder, resting a hand on his scaled flank to calm him. "He is our answer to the White Walkers," she said. "He wields a flame they cannot endure. He cannot be turned by their magic or the Night King's power. We created him for one purpose, to stand against the cold darkness when it comes." A ripple of awe and fear spread through the men. Brandel pushed forward, eyes wide. Are you telling me your people just conjured a dragon?" "Yes," Rill said. "And it was no small feat. We mean to use him in the war. But we cannot do so alone. The dead are many. We need your help, and the help of all men. If the Night King breaks the wall in force, even this dragon will not be enough by itself." Brandel studied Avirix for a long, tense moment, as though half expecting the creature to melt the entire watch with a blast of emerald fire. But Avirix merely regarded the men with calm interest, exhaling short huffs of warm breath that smelled like fresh sap. When Brandel finally spoke, he did so in a hushed tone. The legends said the children possessed magic, but never did I imagine. You have a living dragon. He swallowed hard. Well, you'll find no shortage of foes to test it on if you cross the wall. Nyelia's face hardened. We will do so. If you can spare men to join us on a scouting foray beyond the wall, we can see how dire the situation is. If possible, we'll strike at any White Walker parties we encounter. If not, we'll retreat with our knowledge. Brandel exhaled, glancing at his men. Their expressions ranged from excitement to trepidation. The commander said, "We have few enough men to man the wall as it is. But I can send a small party, perhaps 10 rangers led by me. We'll see for ourselves if the rumors of an undead dragon are true or if the White Walkers are mustering in large numbers. Better to know now than sit idle, waiting." So it was settled. They would cross the wall the following dawn, using a gate at the base that was half frozen from disuse but still passable. The rangers set about gathering what little supplies they had: dragon glass daggers, flaming torches, sturdy swords. Nyelia spent the night inside Castle Black, huddled with her companions by the small fire. The watchmen cast them curious, sometimes fearful glances, but did not pester them with questions. Late into the night, she thought she heard the wind howling above the icy ramparts like a lonely wolf. She prayed silently to the old gods, praying for strength. Morning came with a bitter chill. They ventured to the old gate, watched it slowly creak open. Immediately, a blast of frigid air hit them, carrying flecks of snow. Beyond lay the vast wilderness, an expanse of ice-laden forest and wind-scoured hills. Avarix took flight, circling overhead, keen senses alert for any movement below. The party pushed on through calf-high drifts of snow, eyes scanning for tracks. Despite the daylight, the sky remained sullen gray and the sun never fully broke free of the clouds. After hours of trudging, they found tracks in a frozen ravine, footprints that seemed half-human, half-distorted, meandering aimlessly. White tracks. Tension spiked. The rangers readied weapons. Avarix glided lower, letting out a warning hiss from above. In the next moment, the whites appeared around a bend in the ravine, 8 of them, stumbling with that jerky gait, eyes glowing ice blue. The undead remnants of men, their flesh pale and frostbitten, some wearing tattered black cloaks that might once have belonged to the Watch. The Watchers cursed, horror in their eyes. But they had faced whites before. They raised their weapons, torches flaring. Nyelia felt her gut twist. She looked to Avarix. The dragon opened his jaws, unleashing a torrent of emerald flame that bathed the lead whites in swirling light. Unlike normal fire, which sometimes required sustained contact to destroy whites, this green conflagration seemed to devour the undead instantly. The first 3 collapsed into blackened heaps, their bodies crumbling into a flash of ash. The others, out of the immediate blast, shrank back, but the rangers pressed forward with torches and dragon glass, swiftly dispatching the rest. It ended almost before it began. When the smoke cleared, the rangers stood around the scorched snow, panting. A hush of astonishment fell over them. Nyelia noticed Brandel's wide-eyed stare directed at Avarix. "That was quicker than I've ever seen," he muttered. "The flame just took them. Like they were made of tinder." Nyelia allowed a grim smile. "That's why we made him. We have a weapon that can destroy them swiftly. The question is, can we do the same against the White Walkers themselves or even the Night King? And how many whites can we face at once?" They pressed onward, emboldened but cautious. Every so often they spotted scattered groups of whites, a few at a time. Each time, Avarix's green flame eradicated them in seconds. No casualties, no drawn-out fights. The morale of the rangers soared. It was as if they had found the perfect counter to their greatest tormentors. But all the while, Nyelia suspected that these small groups were mere stragglers, outriders of a larger force. The real threat likely lay deeper in the ice wastes near the Night King's domain. Should they risk going that far? They made camp that night in the shelter of a rocky overhang. A freezing wind howled through the gorge. The watchmen huddled around a meager fire. Nyelia curled against Avarix's warm side, thankful for the dragon's heat. Rill kept first watch, bow in hand, scanning the darkness for movement. Hours later, when it was Nyelia's turn, she found it difficult not to dwell on thoughts of the Night King. If he truly commanded an undead dragon, what horrors awaited them if they pushed too far? She dozed off near dawn, lulled by the steady thrumming of Avarix's heart. In that half-sleep, she dreamed of swirling snow and a single figure standing in the midst of a frozen lake. Tall, crowned with a shard of ice. His eyes glowed blue, and behind him stretched an army of the dead that seemed without end. She glimpsed the silhouette of a monstrous beast behind him, a dragon of ice and rotted flesh, its jaws exhaling a torrent of blue-white flame that froze whatever it touched. She felt a wave of cold so intense it seemed to pierce her heart. Then she woke with a gasp, the dream fading but the horror lingering. 2 days later, the scouting party discovered something that made every drop of blood in their veins run cold. Cresting a ridge, they beheld a valley below, a gathering of whites, easily in the hundreds, milling around in disorganized but undeniably massive formations. At their center stood figures taller than men, robed in pale white, bearing spears of ice. White Walkers. Perhaps a dozen, though it was hard to tell with the distance. There might be more in the surrounding hills. The entire valley seemed shrouded in an eerie mist, as if the land itself were succumbing to an unnatural cold. One of the watchmen muttered a prayer to the seven under his breath, while others simply stared. Brandel cursed softly. That's more whites than we've ever seen at once. The watch can't stand against that. Not alone. How could they gather so many so quickly? Rill whispered. There must be more we haven't even seen. Nailia swallowed. We have to warn the realms. Even with Avarix, facing them all at once would be suicide. He could incinerate many, but their numbers are vast. But if we strike now while they're gathered, we could do massive damage, Brandel said in a conflicted voice. Avarix's flame might burn through scores of them. We'll never have a better chance than when they're all bunched up like that. Solaria's expression was grim. We risk drawing the White Walker's combined wrath. If the Night King is near, he might be able to harm the dragon. Nailia felt torn. The prudent thing was to retreat, gather allies, mount a more strategic offensive. But the sight of so many whites in one place was chilling. If they marched south in that formation, entire regions would fall in days. She looked to Avarix, who perched behind the ridge, staring down at the valley with an almost eager glint in his golden eyes. She realized with a jolt that the dragon felt confident. Perhaps the wards they had woven into him made him inherently fearless in the face of the White Walker's power. Did that arrogance put them all at risk? After a tense debate, Brandel's inclination to strike one out. They would attempt a surprise attack from above, letting Avarix unleash his flame. Meanwhile, the Rangers would target any White Walkers that managed to escape or attempt to rally the Whites. If the Night King himself appeared, they would retreat. But they might cripple the others' forces. That chance was too tempting to ignore. They prepared swiftly. The Rangers spread out along the ridge to pick off anything that tried to climb up. Rill and Solaria readied themselves with bows, lashing dragoglass arrowheads to their shafts. Nailia climbed onto Avarix's back. She did not ride him often, but he had grown enough to carry her short frame in flight. The sensation of the bark-like scales under her thighs was surprisingly comfortable, and a harness of braided vines, prepared by Solaria for just such an occasion, gave Nailia something to hold onto. Heart-pounding, she guided Avarix with soft whistles and gentle pressure from her knees. They rose into the air, whirling up over the ridge, the cold wind whipping Nailia's face. Below, the Whites were completely unaware, fixated on some silent command. Nailia spotted the White Walkers at the heart of the army, tall and imposing, scanning the edges of the valley. Avarix banked, sword in a wide arc, then folded his wings and dove. At her urging, he unleashed a torrent of emerald fire that washed over the unsuspecting horde. The effect was immediate and devastating. A wide swath of Whites disintegrated beneath that unnatural flame, shriveling to ash, leaving only charred ground behind. Dozens, maybe hundreds, gone in an instant. A silent wave of shock ran through the rest, and they began to move, some scrambling away, others surging in confusion. Avarix circled, unleashing another barrage of flame. The Whites' lines fragmented in panic, stumbling over themselves. Nailia felt a fierce, desperate exultation. They were truly harming the enemy, dealing a blow that might have taken entire armies of men to achieve. Yet below, the White Walkers moved swiftly. One raised its spear of ice and hurled it skyward. It missed by yards, but the threat was clear. Another White Walker lifted its hand, channeling a freezing gust that crackled through the air. Avarix jinked aside, roaring defiantly, the green wards shimmering around his body. Nailia felt a bolt of cold pass within an arm's length of her, but it fizzled against the dragon's protective aura, scattering harmlessly. This was exactly why they had spent centuries weaving that immunity into his flesh. From the ridge, the Rangers rained down arrows. Some soared true, dragging down Whites. A few aimed for the White Walkers themselves, but those unnervingly graceful creatures dodged or shattered the arrows with their ice spears. Even so, the advantage was with the attackers, if only for the moment. Another pass with emerald fire burned another swath of Whites. Smoke rose in thick plumes. A shrieking wind whipped through the valley. The White Walkers bunched together, forging an ice barrier. Nailia realized they were rallying. The Whites began to coalesce into a single mass under the ice barrier. She wondered if the White Walkers could shield them from Avarix's fire that way. Fall back! Brandel shouted from the ridge. We've done enough. Nailia signaled Avarix to ascend to give them a vantage. They soared higher, the swirl of snow nearly blinding her. Another spear of ice hissed through the air, missing them by a hair. She realized the White Walkers were forming ranks now, methodically, with the discipline of a chilling intelligence. The advantage of surprise was spent. If they lingered, the White Walkers might trap them. And where was the Night King? If he appeared astride that undead dragon, everything could change in an instant. Anxiety gnawed at her. She urged Avarix to retreat. They had inflicted massive losses on the Whites, but more remained. The White Walkers still stood. That alone was testament to the difficulty they faced. On the ridge, the Rangers withdrew, firing parting shots. Avarix angled his wings, soared back over the crest to rejoin them. They hurried away before the others could organize a pursuit. Heart hammering, Nailia looked behind them and saw the swirl of icy mist that might be White Walkers chasing. But the day grew late, and the wind howled. The enemy seemed content to hold the valley rather than mount an immediate chase. Likely, they did not yet grasp the full nature of the threat posed by this new dragon. Or perhaps the Night King had bigger plans. Either way, the party fled south, spirits torn between relief at surviving and dread at what they had learned. This was no small incursion. The White Walkers truly commanded an army, and they had only seen a fraction of it. It took 2 harrowing days to return to Castle Black. Exhausted, battered by the elements, and haunted by the memory of that valley, the group staggered inside the gate. Word spread fast about what they had seen. No one doubted them now. Some of the watchmen looked at Avarix with reverence, muttering prayers of thanks for his green fire. Brandel, pale but resolute, said, "We'll send ravens again, with news that a new dragon fights for the living. That might rally some swords. If the lords still ignore us, they're dooming themselves." He cast a bleak look at the horizon. "But you've proven that these whites can be destroyed in swathes. That's hope enough for me." Nailia and her companions conferred in private. They had proven Avarix could devastate whites. The wards held against the White Walkers' cold blasts. But in open battle against thousands of undead, the dragon could still be overwhelmed. And if the Night King's rumored undead dragon engaged them, none could predict the outcome. So the question was, do they remain at the wall, using it as a base from which to launch strikes, or do they travel south to plead for unity among the living? If they could rally enough armies behind the unstoppable forest dragon, perhaps they had a chance to shatter the White Walkers once and for all. In the end, they decided that Rill and Celeria would remain to coordinate with Castle Black, leading small forays north of the wall to keep the White Walkers off balance. Meanwhile, Nailia would fly with Avarix to the major strongholds of men, from Winterfell and beyond, to carry the dire warning personally. With proof that a new dragon existed, perhaps the Northern Lords, and eventually all the 7 kingdoms, would realize how high the stakes were. The time of petty squabbles had to end. The living needed to unite. They parted ways with a quiet farewell. Nailia felt torn leaving her fellow children, but the mission demanded it. The hope was that a single awe-inspiring flight by the unstoppable green dragon would achieve what ravens had not. Thus began a whirlwind journey, with Nailia riding Avarix over the snow-covered landscape of the north. They soared above wooded hills, patchwork farmland, and half-frozen rivers. Everywhere they passed, word spread of a strange dragon with green fire. Nailia occasionally landed near villages to speak with the folk. There was fear, curiosity, sometimes hostility, but always astonishment at the sight of a child of the forest riding a majestic creature. Through gestures and the few words of the common tongue she knew, she tried to convey that they must be ready for war, that an army of the dead stirred beyond the wall. The greatest test came at Winterfell. She arrived one cold morning, circling above the high towers and thick walls, mindful of archers who might loose arrows. Sure enough, horns sounded as soon as the watchman spotted a dragon overhead. But Nailia signaled a peaceful approach by letting Avarix land outside the walls in full view of the men on the battlements. The memory of dragons from past wars lingered in their minds. They would not open the gates easily. Still, curiosity got the better of them and the gates parted for a small armed party to investigate. Stepping forward to meet them, Nailia repeated the routine, hands raised in peace, pointing to the winged beast behind her, speaking as best she could. The men gawked at her child of the forest features, short stature, strange eyes, leaf-like patterns on her clothing. Murmurs flew. Children of the forest? I thought they were only in stories. Look at that dragon, by the gods, it's real. Nailia insisted upon speaking to whoever led Winterfell, her tone urgent. She hammered home that the real threat was to the entire realm. The White Walkers had returned and a new dragon now fought for the living. It took hours of negotiation, but at last they escorted her inside. Winterfell's lord, whichever scion of the north that might be in this imagined scenario, received her with caution but not outright hostility. The presence of a living dragon forced them to take her claims seriously. Over a heated meeting in the Great Hall, she told them of the valley, the undead hordes, the White Walkers' unstoppable approach. She described how her dragon's flame could burn whites to ash in seconds. Even the hardest skeptics began to listen. If the undead threatened the entire north, refusing to unite would be folly. Eventually, though grudgingly, they agreed to muster what forces they could spare for the wall. Messages would go out to lesser lords urging them to join the fight. They would gather at Winterfell, then march north. Yet even as Nailia felt a glimmer of hope, she could not ignore a sense of urgency. The White Walkers would not remain idle. The ravens might not reach every corner in time. If the Night King truly commanded an undead dragon, the wall itself could be in jeopardy. She wondered if Rill and Celeria might soon find themselves besieged by a force too great to hold back. The entire north might become a battleground littered with corpses that swelled the enemy ranks. Her mission continued south, for if Winterfell alone stood, it might not be enough. She soared with Ave Rix across the neck, the winds growing warmer, though still tinged with winter's approach. Her presence caused even greater commotion in the southern lands. The sight of a green and gold dragon overshadowed everything else. Some lords refused to grant an audience, cowering behind their walls. Others greeted her, stunned, uncertain if they should see her as a threat or an ally. She repeated her dire warnings, always demonstrating the forest dragon's docile nature unless provoked. In the fields outside certain strongholds, she let him unleash green flames on piles of scrap wood, showing how potent his breath was. It left the watchers slack-jawed. Still, men's hearts were often weighed down by their own intrigues. She learned of southern houses feuding, refusing to unite. She heard rumors of plots and alliances that had nothing to do with the undead. Frustration gnawed at her. Perhaps the realm was too fragmented, too blind to come together until the dead were literally at their doorstep. But she kept trying. Every demonstration of Avrix's power lent credibility to her plea. She insisted that men must march north, or else the war would come to them, and by then it would be too late. Weeks blurred by. Winter came creeping down from the north, dropping snow on lands that rarely saw it so early. Refugees from northern regions trickled south, telling stories of empty villages and unstoppable whites. Slowly, a shift in mood spread. Nailia began hearing that certain lords and knights had heeded the call. Small alliances formed. The rumors of a magical dragon unstoppable by ice circulated wildly, stirring both terror and hope. She urged them all, gather at Winterfell. Stand with the Night's Watch. The living must unite. Eventually, she could do no more in the south. She turned back north, hoping her efforts had borne fruit. The journey back felt even harsher, winter's grip tightening daily. Snowstorms whipped across the plains. She rested whenever possible, letting Ave Rix hunt for deer or boar, though the pickings grew slim. Her own nerves frayed at the edges. Every day that passed, the White Walkers might be advancing. She dreamed of that ancient forest clearing, the moment of forging this dragon. She reminded herself of the hope that had guided them then. So long as one living flame remained, the darkness would not triumph. At last, she saw Winterfell's walls ahead. What she beheld gave her a measure of relief. Hundreds of tents spread beyond the walls, banners of various northern houses fluttering in the wind. The host was not massive, but it was more than she expected. The lords had responded. Men marched to face the threat. She landed in a swirl of snow, greeted by wide-eyed guards who recognized the child of the forest. They ushered her into the castle. There, the lord told her of how ravens had come from Castle Black, urging immediate reinforcements. The White Walkers had tested the wall in small assaults, but had not yet come in full force. The watchers believed the main horde was still massing. Some said the Night King was waiting for the dead of winter when his power would be absolute. Men from multiple houses had gathered, though not all. Still, it was a start. Thousands of soldiers, knights, archers, along with a contingent of wildlings who had crossed south, seeing no reason to remain in the path of the dead. They prepared to march north at any day's notice, though they waited for stragglers from more distant holds. It warmed Nyalia's heart to see men from rival houses standing shoulder to shoulder, if only out of necessity. The threat of extinction brought them together in ways lesser troubles could not. Avrix's presence galvanized them. When he roared in the Winterfell courtyard, spitting emerald fire into the gray sky, it stilled any last voices of doubt. For a moment, a thunderous cheer swept the men. Even if that confidence was fragile, it was real. They had a new weapon, something that might tilt the scales in an impossible war. Tales spread among the ranks, calling Avarix the Green Dawn, the leaf-scaled WIRM, and all manner of poetic epithets. But would it be enough? That was the question that dogged Nyalia's every step. She conferred with the local maesters about strategies for fighting whites. They had little to offer beyond the usual fire, dragonglass, Valyrian steel. The realm's supply of such weapons was limited. She thought about how the children might conjure more wards or enchantments, but the presence of so many men made that a delicate prospect. The forest's magic did not mingle easily with the hearts of men. Instead, she put her faith in the dragon, in the alliances forming. If enough men marched, if they used winter tactics and the advantage of the forest dragon's unstoppable flame, perhaps they could destroy the White Walkers once and for all. Meanwhile, fresh tidings arrived from the wall. A runner from the Night's Watch brought word that White Walker raids were intensifying, but that the main host had yet to move. The Watchers believed the Night King was biding his time. They also reported that Rill and Celeria had helped repel numerous white assaults. Avrix's presence was sorely missed, but the Watchers used guerrilla tactics, picking off small groups. So far, they had held. A week passed intense preparation. The northern host grew as minor lords trickled in. Then the horns of Winterfell sounded one cold gray dawn. A rider from the wall arrived, half dead from exhaustion and frostbite, bearing a single message: the White Walker host was on the move. Thousands of whites marched south, White Walkers leading them, a tide of death. The Night's Watch could not repel so many. Castle Black would soon be overrun unless reinforced immediately. That was all it took. Orders went out. Within hours, the host set forth. Thousands of men trudged north under driving snow, with Nyalia and Avarix flying overhead, scouting and offering protection. Never had she seen such a sight, an army of living souls braving the bitter cold, forging onward to face an unimaginable foe. Spears, swords, and axes gleamed in the muted light, while banners flapped bravely in the wind. Yet Nyalia sensed fear pulsing through their ranks. They had never fought an enemy like the White Walkers. Some might have wondered if the new dragon was enough to tip the balance. Days of hard marching brought them within sight of the wall. The fortifications of Castle Black loomed, as did the swirling clouds that hovered perpetually beyond. Fires burned on the ramparts, though the Watchers had not yet engaged in final battle. The men poured into the fortress and its surroundings, forming lines, setting up temporary battlements. Archers took positions on the walkways. The moaning wind carried a sense of dread. Any hour now, the enemy might appear across the horizon in numbers beyond counting. Nyalia landed in the courtyard, sliding off Avrix's flank. She was met by a weary but resolute Rill and Celeria. The two children embraced her briefly. "You've done it," Rill said, scanning the army setting up in the courtyard. "You brought men. Enough, I hope." Celeria nodded gratefully to see the dragon again, her eyes shining. "We've held them back in small skirmishes, but the main host, it's bigger than we feared." Brandel, standing nearby with bandaged arm, added, "We're hearing that the Night King is indeed among them. No sign of the undead dragon yet, but that might change." He looked to Nyalia, a flicker of fear in his eyes. "If you can kill him, the rest might fall, at least that's what some claim. Or at least we can break their ranks." Nyalia steeled herself. "Then we fight here, at the wall. If we can't hold them, we'll make our stand somewhere further south, but I'd rather meet them head-on with the advantage of these defenses. We have the Watcher's knowledge, we have men, we have the forest dragon. Let that be enough." Night fell in a swirl of wind and half-frozen snow. Torches dotted the walls, flickering in the dark. Patrols paced nervously. The hours stretched long. Many wondered if the White Walkers would attack under cover of night or wait for dawn. In her heart, Nyalia suspected they preferred the dark. So she stood atop the wall with Rill and Celeria, scanning the endless whiteness beyond. Avarix perched on a spur of ice just below, restless, occasionally lifting his head to sniff the air. The gloom pressed in, broken only by meager light. The hush weighed on them like a tomb. Then they saw it, a faint shimmer on the horizon, a murmur of movement. When the moon's pale light broke through the clouds, it revealed a host that stretched across the land like a shadow. Whites, countless whites, their eyes flickering a cold blue. Standing amidst them, tall silhouettes, the White Walkers, lords of winter incarnate. Swords of ice glinted in the moonlight. The horns of Castle Black sounded a forlorn warning. The men hastily readied themselves along the battlements. Archers knocked arrows, foot soldiers gripped swords and shields. Fear mingled with grim determination. Nyalia's pulse thundered in her ears. Her breath fogged in the freezing air. She glanced to Ril, who swallowed hard but kept his composure. Solaria's hand trembled on the hilt of a dragonglass blade. The watchers braced for the onslaught. Then, in the distance, a deafening roar split the sky. But it was not Avrix's clarion call. It was a deeper, more anguished sound, like the earth itself crying out in torment. From behind the White Walker lines, a silhouette rose. A monstrous shape in the sky, wings tattered, flesh half-rotted, exhaling a plume of frosty breath that crackled in the air. The undead dragon was real. Its eyes glowed a baleful blue. Some men cried out in terror, others cursed. Nyalia felt her blood turn to ice. This was the true test. Forest dragon against undead dragon. Creation against corruption. The horns sounded again, and the battle began. Whites surged forward in a wave of limbs and shrieks, slamming into defenses. The men on the wall loosed arrows and poured flaming oil. The fight erupted with horrifying speed. Below, at Castle Black's base, men thrust spears through undead torsos only for them to keep coming. Those with dragon glass weapons fared better, dispatching whites in single stabs. The White Walkers advanced more deliberately, each commanding a section of whites. Their presence sapped warmth from the air, forming frost on steel and turning breath to crystals. Nyalia signaled to Avrix. With a roar, the dragon launched himself from his perch, diving over the wall into the fray. Emerald flames ripped through the ranks of whites, incinerating entire swaths. Screams filled the air, and the stench of burning flesh rose. For an instant, the defenders cheered. But the wave behind that. First line of whites pressed on, heedless of those destroyed. Like an ocean tide, they kept coming. High above, the undead dragon circled, the Night King visible on its back, a solitary figure crowned with ice. Then it dove, exhaling a cone of swirling frost fire that struck part of the wall, causing thick cracks to spiderweb through the ice. Defenders scattered in panic. Some were blasted by that unnatural flame, freezing solid in moments. A chunk of the wall groaned as it began to weaken. Fear roiled in Nyalia. She had to act quickly or they would lose the wall entirely. She climbed onto Avrix's back, shouting to Ril, "Hold them as best you can." Ril only nodded, eyes grim. Then she and Avrix ascended, determined to keep the undead dragon from destroying the wall. Higher and higher they spiraled, the wind threatening to tear her from the harness. The undead beast rose to meet them, eyes ablaze with malevolent blue light. A hush fell in Nyalia's mind, replaced by a furious pounding of her heart. The Night King was close enough now that she could make out his expressionless face, cold as death. For a second, dread threatened to paralyze her. Avrix roared. Emerald flame spewed forth. The undead dragon answered with a torrent of frosty breath. The two forces collided in midair with a flash of crackling energy. The emerald fire hissed and spat, trying to devour the cold flame. The icy breath snarled back, forming shards of rime. They seemed almost evenly matched, locked in a clash that lit the sky with green and pale blue. But then the wards in Avrix's flame surged stronger, fueled by the living magic of the weirwoods. The cold blast began to falter, forced back inch by inch. Below them, in the moonlight, the armies raged. The whites hammered the defenses, men fought back with steel and dragon glass, the White Walkers strode forward with terrifying calm. Scattered vantage points lit up with the green glow of fallen whites whenever Avrix's flame touched down. But the main spectacle was in the sky, a draconic duel the likes of which the world had never seen. The living forest's champion against the undead harbinger of the long night. Soldiers on both sides paused in awe or terror, seeing two dragons locked in swirling arcs of unnatural flame. Avrix roared again, pressing the attack. The undead dragon twisted with surprising agility, half its flesh stripped away to reveal frosted bone. The Night King hurled a spear of ice, aiming at Nyalia. She ducked low, clinging to the dragon's neck. Avrix swooped aside, the spear tearing through the edge of his wing. The dragon roared in pain but maintained flight, the living wards already knitting the damage with creeping green energy. The undead dragon dove, jaws snapping at Avrix's flank. They collided midair in a tangle of teeth, claws, and supernatural fury. Nyalia nearly lost her grip. She felt the freezing aura rolling off the undead beast. For a moment it seemed the Night King might strike her down with a blade of ice. She saw those cold blue eyes, a reflection of endless winter. But the wards held. Where the undead dragon's flesh touched Avrix's leafy scales, steam erupted in bursts of emerald sparks. The wards seared away the corruption, forcing the undead beast back. With a savage lunge, Avrix snapped at the rotted wing membrane, tearing away a chunk that dissolved into icy shards. The undead dragon let out an ear-splitting shriek. The Night King clung to its back, unflinching. Frost crystals formed on Avrix's muzzle as the cold breath exhaled point-blank, but the living magic burned it away almost as quickly. Their fierce combat soared back and forth across the sky. The armies on the ground continued their brutal struggle, but many eyes were drawn upward, for whoever won that contest would surely sway the war. Time lost meaning in the chaos. Nailia fought to keep her seat, guiding Avrix only loosely now. The dragon seemed to know on some instinctual level how to combat this undead foe. The wards flared and pulsed, each blow fueling them further. A part of Nailia's soul resonated with the magic, though it drained her, leaving her lightheaded. If this went on too long, she might pass out. She had to trust that Avrix would end it quickly. At last, the undead dragon faltered. More of its wing was shredded, green flames licking across its skeletal ribcage. The Night King raised his ice spear once more, perhaps intending a final desperate throw. But in that instant, Avrix unleashed a concentrated torrent of emerald fire directly at him. The icy aura around the Night King clashed with the flame, creating a blinding flash. For a breathless moment, the two forces hung in balance. Then the wards triumphed. The emerald blaze broke through, washing over the undead dragon and its master. An unearthly shriek tore the sky. The undead dragon's bones collapsed into ashen shards, spiraling downward while the Night King tumbled from the sky. For an instant, his form was still visible, wreathed in green fire. Then the flames consumed him, leaving only a crackle of sparks that scattered in the wind. Below, the White Walkers froze. The whites shuddered, many collapsing where they stood as the magic animating them unraveled. Some White Walkers attempted to rally, but the sudden shock of the Night King's destruction rippled through their ranks like a fatal wound. Rill and Celeria, seeing their chance, led a surge against the stunned whites. Men all along the line pressed forward. The tide turned abruptly. The once relentless dead fell to pieces, their eyes snuffed out. White Walkers faced dragoglass blades, some being cut down while in disarray. A few fled into the snowy darkness, perhaps to regroup. But the heart of the army was shattered. The living roared in victory. Horns blared triumphantly. The wave of undead had finally been stilled. Nailia, slumped in the harness, hardly believed it. She had seen the Night King wreathed in her dragon's flame, watched him vanish. Could it truly be that simple to end centuries of terror? Her limbs felt leaden, her soul drained. But a wave of relief and joy coursed through her. "We did it," she whispered, stroking Avrix's neck. The dragon roared, a sound of triumph that echoed across the night sky. Below, thousands of men lifted their voices in stunned celebration, the hush of disbelief giving way to thunderous cheers. They landed beyond the ruined battlefield amidst heaps of crumpled whites that no longer stirred. Here and there, battered men lay wounded or dead, for the undead had inflicted a grim toll before the final turn. Yet the living had won. Those few White Walkers who survived had fled, their magic undone in the absence of their king. Rill and Celeria raced to Nailia as she climbed off Avrix. Before they could speak, she sank to her knees in exhaustion. They caught her, supporting her slight frame. She wanted to reassure them she was fine, but words caught in her dry throat. Brandel approached, equally battered, his face streaked with blood. Still, he wore a stunned smile. You've done it," he rasped. "The Night King, gone." His voice shook with the enormity of that statement. "The others are scattering, or falling. I've never seen them break like this." Nailia found enough strength to whisper, "It was Avrix." "The wards. We forged him to defeat the ice." Men crowded around, some kneeling before the dragon in awe, others pressing forward to see if the stories were true. Some wept openly, overcome by relief. Many had lost friends, but at least the living had prevailed. Nailia gazed at Avrix, who stood tall, luminous with residual energy. She felt profound gratitude and affection for the creature who had surpassed all their hopes. The children of the forest had risked everything to create a dragon incorruptible and invincible to the White Walkers. And now, in a single fierce struggle, that risk had borne fruit. The dawn crept over the horizon, revealing the scale of the destruction. The battlefield was littered with blackened remains of whites and the broken weapons of men. A hush fell, and a wave of somber reflection gripped the survivors. They had won, but at great cost. Still, it was a cost that would have been far worse had the forest dragon not intervened. Eventually, the battered forces began the grim task of gathering their dead, tending the wounded, and securing the remaining White Walkers who might be lurking in hiding. But their threat was effectively ended, at least for this generation. The long night had been averted by a union of men and the children of the forest, guided by the living flame of a dragon born of roots and leaves. Nailia stood with Ril, Celeria, and Avarix at the foot of the wall, gazing north. Snow drifted softly as though now it was merely weather, not a harbinger of apocalypse. She remembered that clearing under the ancient weirwood, the hush that had settled when they poured the shimmering liquid into the earth. She thought of the centuries of fear that the Night King would return, unstoppable. Today proved that nothing was truly invincible, that hope and unity could triumph even over the darkest magic. She felt a gentle warmth at her side. Avarix pressed against her, the living embodiment of that hope. A handful of watchmen nearby muttered about what came next. Some looked at the broken remnants of the undead dragon's bones, scattered across the plain, half subsumed by fresh snow. Others simply stared at Avarix in wonder. Many raised fists in celebration or bowed their heads in awe. For once, the realm was united, if only briefly, by a single victory that all could claim. Word would spread, songs would be sung. Men would eventually return to their old squabbles, perhaps. But the memory of this night, of the dragon crowned with living flame, would not soon fade. Brandel approached one last time, saluting stiffly. His eyes shone with gratitude. "We owe you a debt," he said. "Without you and your dragon, the North would have fallen. The whole realm would be lost." Nailia shook her head. "You do not owe me. This was for all the living. But perhaps you will remember the children of the forest, and let the memory of our alliance live on. One day our people may need each other again." He nodded. "On my honor, we will remember." Then he turned to glance at his men, who shuffled uncertainly. One by one, they raised voices in a ragged cheer, calling out to the child of the forest, to the green dragon, to the memory of so many fallen. It was a moment of unity and defiance in a world often plagued by strife. In the days that followed, as the realm slowly absorbed the magnitude of the White Walkers' defeat, Nailia and her companions quietly slipped away. With their mission fulfilled, the children of the forest preferred to return to their hidden groves, to tend the weirwoods and safeguard the old magic. They left behind only legends, that at the height of winter's threat, a dragon of living flame appeared in the north, forged by the children of the forest, incorruptible and invincible to the Night King's power, and in a great battle above the wall, it banished the long night before it could descend again. As Nailia guided Avarix back into the deep woods, far from the eyes of men, she felt more at peace than she ever had. The hush of the weirwood grove greeted them. The ancient trees seemed to rustle in welcome, as though praising their champion. A faint glow lingered in the clearing where once the dragon was born, a reminder of the sacrifice and magic unleashed. Ehera and the other elders waited there. They listened, eyes brimming with emotion, as Nailia recounted the final confrontation. They touched Avarix's scales in reverence, murmuring words of thanks to the old gods. Their creation had succeeded beyond measure. As the seasons turned, men rebuilt, burying their dead and celebrating their hard-won peace. The children of the forest returned to their quiet existence, watching the realm from afar, nurturing the forest's silent rhythms. Now and then, in the quiet hush before dawn, if one listened closely, one might hear the beating of powerful wings among the trees. And sometimes, if fortune favored a traveler deep in the old growth, they might catch a glimpse of a majestic green dragon perched upon a mossy hill, leaves swirling around him like courtiers, golden eyes reflecting the ancient knowledge of the weirwoods. And in that instant, perhaps the traveler would realize that the realm was not alone, that there were powers older and kinder than winter's malice, and that so long as life endured, darkness would never reign unchallenged. For Nailia, the memory of that final battle remained carved into her mind like the face on a weirwood trunk. She thought of the Night King's ice-cold stare, of the biting terror that nearly overwhelmed her, and of the burst of living flame that finally drove that darkness away. In that conflagration, she saw not only the destruction of a great evil but also the renewal of an ancient pact, that the children of the forest stood and would always stand beside all living creatures in the face of annihilation. And so, as the trees whispered their lullabies, she rested beside Avarix, grateful to be home, grateful for the new dawn they had secured, however tenuous it might be. In the end, the question of whether the children of the forest should ever tamper again with such formidable magic was left unanswered. The forest dragon was their champion, a living artifact of the greatest power they could muster, and it had fulfilled its destiny. But the world beyond the glade was vast, unpredictable, and often cruel. Perhaps one day another threat would arise. Perhaps one day men would remember to call upon the guardians of the old magic. Or perhaps men would forget again, as they always seemed to do, writing their own stories and legends until the truth blurred like footprints in fresh snow. Yet this time, the seeds of unity had been planted and a living dragon roamed the deep woods, forever immune to the clutches of ice. That, at least, was a promise that for now, the night's darkness had been pushed back and the living still had reason to hope. Nailia lingered beneath the ancient weirwoods, listening to the groaning hush of the northern wind. It was weeks now since the Night King had burned to ash in the torrent of Avrix's emerald flame. Darkness's threat had seemed so final that evening, yet sunrise had come, revealing a field of broken wights and battered living, the latter alive solely by virtue of an alliance that once would have felt impossible. The children of the forest and men had stood shoulder to shoulder, uniting their disparate magics and mortal blades to shatter the hold the others had claimed on the land. So much had changed in so short a time. From her vantage in the heart of a grove far from men's eyes, Nailia reflected on the swirl of events. She and Avarix, the living dragon wrought from the forest's ancient power, had returned north of the new battlements and meager encampments near the wall. The realm of men was busy burying its dead, caring for its wounded, and exchanging stories of that night in 100 different tongues. A hush had fallen on the world, as though it did not quite believe the menace had truly been quelled. Men still expected the ground to tremble with the tread of wights, to glimpse the glare of ice-blue eyes in the darkness. Instead, a fragile peace prevailed. In the clearing, soft moss and tangled roots rose like arthritic fingers from the earth. Sunlight, muted by drifting clouds, cast subtle shapes along the bark of the weirwoods. Nailia listened to the slow, nearly imperceptible heartbeat of the forest. Ahara sat across from her, the venerable elder who had first entrusted her with the knowledge of forging a dragon. Bent with age, pale vines woven through her hair, Ahara exhaled gently as she passed a bowl of shimmering liquid into Nailia's hands. It was the same living essence they had used to create Avarix, though now it held only a fraction of its original potency. Nailia felt the light warmth pulsing through the bowl's sides. She studied the greenish glow. It stirred up old memories of that night, of Rill and Celeria chanting spells older than speech itself, of the swirling mists forming branches and bones, giving shape to a winged beast that soared and roared on the cusp of life. Something in Nailia's chest twisted. The power that had guided them then had been driven by desperation. They had never anticipated a day when men might ask them to forge another. But that was precisely the matter weighing on Ahara's mind. She murmured in a soft voice that carried the echoes of centuries. "We have heard the rumors in the weirwoods whispers. Certain lords speak of requesting more dragons. Some wonder if it is possible to mass-produce an army of them. Others ponder whether they can bend Avarix to their own will. They do not understand that this magic is not a tool for mortal ambitions." Nailia lowered her gaze, letting the gentle pulse of the liquid roll against her palms. Men have always wanted to harness power. Now that they've glimpsed what the forest can do, they may grow bolder. But she faltered. "Perhaps we owe them an explanation. We won a victory together. We do not want men to grow suspicious or turn on us." Ahara inclined her head slowly. "You have grown wise, child. We stand at a crossroads. Our existence has always been cloaked in secrecy, but the forging of Avarix has changed the balance. Whether we like it or not, we cannot simply slip into legend again. Men have seen us. Some revere us for saving them from the Night King's army. Others might see advantage or, indeed, an enemy. We must proceed carefully." Nailia felt a tremor of unease ripple through her. The end of the White Walkers, it seemed, was only a beginning. She thought of how, in the old days, the children had retreated from men's encroachments, burning their own forests at times, or forging ephemeral alliances only to vanish before men's ambition took root. Now, after forging a living weapon that had changed the course of history, they risked entangling themselves in the power struggles of the realm. Her gaze slid over to Avarix, curled dozing in the clearing beyond, scales dappled by shifting sunlight. His sides rose and fell with a calm rhythm, the faint luminescence in his leafy hide pulsing like a breath of wind through a canopy. He looked so peaceful, as though all was well in the world. But the hush of peace in the forest could be deceptive. She thought about the energies still roiling in the wake of the Night King's demise, and how certain remnants of the White Walkers might still roam, severed from their master but not necessarily destroyed. She also imagined the Southern Lords, flush with relief, soon turning their thoughts to new concerns. Lines of succession, petty grudges, or expansions of territory. They might see in the children's magic a resource to be exploited. She wondered if the forest was strong enough to hold its own once again. Ahara took back the bowl, letting the bright glow shine across the wrinkled contours of her face. If we do not meet with men to lay down terms, they might come searching for us, or for secrets they believe we keep. I wish only to spare our people another war. Nyelia's throat tightened. I could go again, speak to them, but I'm no statesman. Our ways and theirs are so different. It was easy enough to unite when the White Walkers threatened everyone. Now that the threat is gone, men might not feel they need us. Ahara's thin lips curved in a dry, almost sad smile. You are wrong, child. They will covet the ability to conjure dragons as we do. And some of them will find ways to tweeze that knowledge into a weapon for conquest. We must prevent that. A breeze stirred the clearing. Far above, the weirwood leaves whispered, their blood-red coloration vibrant against the pale sky. Nyelia felt the ancient presence of countless memories as though the forest itself was watching them decide their course. Once more, the children of the forest held the fate of the realm in their hands, yet again, it was not a burden any of them wanted. Over the next day, she conferred with Rill and Celeria, explaining Ahara's concerns. Rill was pragmatic, as always, they could not hide forever. Word spread quickly in men's courts. Some powerful individuals might be plotting to capture or kill a child of the forest in hopes of extracting the secrets of forging a living dragon. Celeria's mouth tightened in worry at that thought, recalling how men had once nearly driven the children to extinction. But the forest had changed since then. A living dragon soared within its boundaries, swift to defend any intrusion. That alone gave them a new bargaining position. They might not need to cower or hide. They could negotiate from a position of relative strength, and if pressed, they could demonstrate that the forest was not to be trifled with. Yet none of them desired open conflict. They only wanted to safeguard the delicate balance they had just fought so desperately to preserve. Finally, it was decided, Nyelia would leave again, accompanied by Rill. They would journey south and seek out the newly crowned king in the north if indeed a single figure had emerged as a recognized leader among the lords who had joined the fight. If not, they would approach the major houses together and deliver their message. The forging of dragons was not a gift to be bartered or stolen, but a singular miracle performed to defeat an existential threat. There would be no second forging. Nyelia dreaded another trek through the realm of men. During the war, the sense of immediate danger and dire need had steadied her nerves. Now, she worried about intrigues and backroom dealings, about the manipulations that sometimes occurred in halls of power. She cast her mind back to the memory of Brandel, the steward-turned-commander of the Night's Watch. He, at least, had been honorable. Perhaps he still served at Castle Black or traveled across the north to rally men. She thought he might stand as an ally, a bridge between her people and the new leadership if such a figure existed. The thought gave her a small measure of comfort. They set out on a gray morning, the forest blanketed in swirling mist. Avarix flew overhead, carrying them in short glides when the trees thinned, then landing so they could walk through denser stands. It felt like a ghostly reflection of the earlier journey when they had rushed with desperate speed to gather men for the final confrontation. Now, the same land felt quieter. Once frozen streams began to thaw. Refugees wandered in small groups, returning to their homes, or pressing south in search of new livelihoods. Everywhere, men recognized Avarix on sight and parted with wide eyes or hurried bows. Some even called out blessings or thanks, as though the presence of the dragon reminded them of the victory. Once or twice, Nyelia glimpsed men who seemed frightened, ducking behind ruined buildings or huddling in ditches. Perhaps the echo of old stories about dragons, tales of devastation and burned fields, still held them in thrall. She assured them she meant no harm, though she seldom lingered for lengthy conversation. This journey had a purpose. Eventually, they arrived again at the battered gates of Winterfell, the fortress that had served as a final muster point before the armies marched north. Word had traveled quickly enough that, upon arrival, Nyelia and Rill were greeted by watchmen who recognized them. Unlike last time, the gates opened promptly. No horns blared, no archers readied. Still, the tension in the air was palpable. For the keep teemed with soldiers, guards, and various lords in cloaks discussing the rebuilding efforts. The courtyard was a chaos of wagons bearing supplies, blacksmiths hammering out new swords, and clusters of men practicing drills with wooden dummies. War had ended, but the realm was still on guard, uncertain what the future might bring. They dismounted, letting Averix land outside the walls. The massive gates were not quite wide enough for the dragon to comfortably pass without causing alarm, so Nailia left him in the yard, where watchers gawked from a safe distance. The plan was for him to remain visible yet unthreatening. She exchanged a look with Rill, who gave a small nod of encouragement. They had done this before. The old anxiety in her chest eased a fraction, and she stepped forward into the fortress. The steward who had greeted them introduced himself as Halloran, a gruff man with lines of worry etched into his brow. He wore a heavy fur cloak, as though still bracing for winter's worst, even though the days had begun to thaw. He escorted Nailia and Rill through narrow corridors lined with flickering torches, deep into the great hall. The memory of her last visit came back with a strange pang. Then, the castle had been in a frantic swirl of preparation for war, with men from many houses present. Now, the hall was somewhat less packed, but small gatherings of lords and knights still conferred at tables. Some recognized Nailia, standing up to stare as she passed. The hush that followed in her wake was unnerving. At the raised dais, near the old seat of the Starks, a tall, broad-shouldered man stood in conversation with a pair of lesser lords. His dark hair was streaked with silver, and he bore a scar across one temple, a fresh reminder of the war. Halloran bowed to him and murmured something about the arrival of the children of the forest and the dragon. The man turned, eyes keen, and studied Nailia and Rill. He stepped forward with a gait that suggested mild stiffness in his right knee, likely from a recent injury. But his expression was calm, measured. She inclined her head, her voice soft. "I am Nailia of the Children of the Forest, and this is Rill. You may have heard how we fought at the wall, forging the dragon that turned the tide." The man nodded. "Lord Ivor Bolton," he introduced himself, then hesitated as though deciding how best to proceed. "Though some call me the King in the North, now that so many old lines are extinguished. I never sought the crown, but the lords here insisted. I lead them for now, but my hold is tenuous at best. It's not easy uniting men after such devastation." Rill spoke quietly. "We're not here to question your rule nor to demand anything. We have come to talk about the future, about our people and your people in the wake of the war." Lord Ivor's expression shifted, a subtle wariness. "Then let us speak plainly. Your dragon saved us all from a horror beyond imagination. The White Walkers might have slaughtered every living soul in the north and beyond if not for that decisive blow. For that you have our gratitude. But there are many who wonder if the realm is truly safe with such a creature at large. And more who wonder if more dragons might be conjured." He paused, glancing around the great hall, ensuring that no prying ears were too close. "I'd rather speak without too many witnesses. Come." He led them into a smaller adjoining chamber, likely once a solar or a private audience room. Tapestries of wolves and winter scenes lined the walls. A small hearth crackled at one end, providing a modest warmth. Rill and Nailia followed, their footfalls muffled on the old stone. Once inside, Lord Ivor shut the door, leaving behind only Halloran, who remained at a respectful distance near the back. The new king in the north motioned them to sit on stools near the hearth. Nailia took a seat, feeling a slight tension in her shoulders. In a low voice, she addressed him. "We have heard rumors that some in the realm want to replicate the forging of the dragon, that they might see it as a pathway to power, for conquest, or for intimidation. We must tell you now that cannot be permitted." Lord Ivor's expression darkened. "You realize that after your dragon's triumph, half the lords in the north, indeed, some from beyond, have already approached me with eager tongues about the idea of capturing a bit of that power. They imagine breeding new lines of dragons, forging magical beasts in secret, then using them to hold the rest of the kingdom in check. They say if the Targaryens once ruled with dragons, why not the north now, armed with a more unassailable breed?" Rill's lips pressed into a thin line. "If they try to replicate what we did, they will fail and possibly doom us all to some new abomination." His voice was quiet but insistent. "This magic is not for mortals to toy with. Even among the children of the forest, it was a forbidden act that we only dared attempt when extinction itself stood at our threshold. Lord Ivor studied their faces, a flicker of respect in his eyes. A fair stance. I do not disagree with it. Even so, the Lord's demands weigh on me. They look for ways to restore their power, to protect their lands against the next threat, whatever it may be. Some fear the scattered remnants of the White Walkers might regroup. Some worry that, in the chaos, southern forces will press advantage north. Dragons, in their minds, solve every problem. A harsh laugh escaped him. As if forging unstoppable monsters were so simple. Nailia nodded. You see the dilemma, then. We have come to propose a treaty of sorts. The children of the forest will remain open to dialogue, but we vow never again to conjure another beast. And we ask that men vow never to come in search of that power or to harm our enclaves in an attempt to glean it. If they do, she paused, searching for the right words. We would protect ourselves, and that would lead to a conflict none of us want. He gave a measured nod. I understand. But what if men demand proof that you will not conjure more? They may suspect you of forging a secret army of dragons in the far forests. The rumor alone might stir them to aggression. Rill drew a slow breath. Words alone may not suffice. But we can demonstrate the ritual's cost. Perhaps if men witness that we have exhausted the forest's supply of that power, they will see it cannot be repeated without dire consequences. Lord Ivor mulled this over, drumming calloused fingers on the arm of his chair. You would do some demonstration, you mean? Nailia exchanged a glance with Rill. The truth was that forging even a spark of that magic required delicate rites and would be dangerous to perform as a spectacle. But on the other hand, perhaps they could show how the leftover essence in a Hera's bowl was limited and would be devoured in the process of forging the smallest shape. It would be a mere illusion, a partial conjuration that would dissolve like morning mist. They might stage it in a controlled environment to prove that the forest's store of magic had indeed been spent. Yet the prospect unsettled Nailia. The forging of Avarix had nearly unraveled them. Doing anything like it again, even in miniature, felt risky. The power carried a will of its own, swirling with the forest's ancient energies. Still, maybe something symbolic would suffice. At last she nodded. We could attempt a lesser demonstration, not forging new life, but showing how the ingredients for such power have been expended, leaving only a tiny spark that can do no more. It could be enough to dissuade men from searching for secrets that do not exist. Lord Ivor looked relieved, though still cautious. If you do so, I can gather the major lords. They'll want to see it with their own eyes. We can hold a formal summit somewhere neutral. Moat Cailin, perhaps, or even here in Winterfell. A place that stands as a symbol of northern strength. He paused, scanning their faces. But you should know that some might still approach you in secret, offering bribes or threatening. Others might be furious that you'd show them the scraps of magic without teaching them the full craft. I'll do my best to keep things orderly, but after all that's happened, tensions run high. We understand, Rill said quietly. We only want peace. Nailia, mind spinning with the possibilities, rose from her stool and bowed her head with a courtesy that once might have seemed alien to a child of the forest. Thank you for hearing us. We appreciate your honesty. If you arrange a gathering, we will attend. They parted ways soon after, with an agreement that word would be sent to the lords who had participated in the final battles against the White Walkers, plus any who claimed leadership in the new era. Lord Ivor would present this as a chance to see for themselves the near impossibility of forging another forest-born dragon. That would hopefully stifle the rumor mill and ensure no misguided crusade marched into the deep forests in search of hidden spells. As Nailia and Rill left the keep, crossing the courtyard to rejoin Avarix, they found the dragon surrounded by a respectful circle of onlookers. The creature lay with wings folded, occasionally letting out a soft croon that reverberated in his chest. Some men dared approach close enough to admire the patterns in his scales or to toss bits of salted meat in his direction. Nailia suspected that earlier in the war, the same men might have trembled or tried to shoot him from the sky. But victory had a way of changing hearts. She stepped forward and patted his flank. We're not done yet, friend, she murmured. Avarix gazed at her with glowing gold eyes that always seemed to reflect the forest spirit. In them she saw unwavering trust. When she climbed onto his back, Rill behind her, the dragon rose with careful grace. The watchers stepped back in alarm at his sudden movement, but none raised a weapon. Moments later, his powerful wings beat the air, and they soared over Winterfell's walls, swirling past the banners that snapped in the cold wind. Soon, the fortress dwindled beneath them and they turned in the direction of the old forest, returning with the news of a summit. The flight brought them once again past ruined hamlets and frost-rimed fields, slowly showing the first hints of thaw. Distantly, they glimpsed caravans of survivors heading home or traveling south to find new fortunes. Smoke rose in thin trails from dwellings that had survived the onslaught. As they crossed the boundary where the forest thickened, shadows fell across them like protective arms welcoming them back. They landed in a clearing not far from Ihara's domain, their hearts heavy with the message. Once they had explained the situation, Ihara's leaf-brown face grew grim. She pressed a gnarled hand to her brow. "So soon do men seek advantage," she mused. "Yet I cannot say I am surprised. We must do as you have agreed. A demonstration that will end the question once and for all." Her gold-flecked eyes traveled to the bowl of shimmering liquid, resting atop a carved stump at the center of the clearing. "We shall craft a small sign of life, an elemental swirl that cannot sustain itself. It will burn the last of the forging essence. Men will see that the well is dry." Nailia felt a pang. Despite her misgivings, she could think of no better plan. If it could avert future conflict, so be it. The next question was the location. They needed a place where men could gather safely, but which would not endanger the heart of the children's realm. Eventually, they settled on Winterfell itself. It had the space for a large gathering, the newly declared king in the north presiding, and enough neutrality to invite southern lords if they chose to come. That might be the best chance at a lasting peace. Arrangements moved swiftly. Over the next few weeks, ravens flew in every direction, carrying messages sealed with the direwolf sigil for the north, beckoning lords to gather for a final reckoning over the question of forging dragons. Some letters likely traveled to the Vale, some to the Riverlands, perhaps even further south, though how many southern lords would bother trekking north in the lingering winter was uncertain. A few might send envoys instead, or ignore the summons entirely. Still, enough had witnessed the White Walker's threat to know the north was not an idle place. As the day of the summit neared, the children of the forest prepared the demonstration. Ihara worked tirelessly with Celeria and Rill to shape the words of the incantation. Their goal: conjure a phantom shell of bark and vine, perhaps the shape of a small lizard or worm, something that would glow with the residual forest flame for a moment before dissipating. The result would be dramatic, especially for untrained onlookers, yet harmless. It would also consume the last of the shimmering essence that had once birthed Averix. That final act would be their pledge that no more dragons could be created. Nailia frequently visited the edges of the clearing, where Averix rested. The dragon seemed to sense her tension, nuzzling her shoulder with quiet comfort. She recalled the dire hush of the day they had first poured that essence into the earth, forging him from desperation. They had never imagined they would be forced to prove that such magic was not a well to be tapped at will. "Strange times," she whispered to him. "But I promise you, once we do this, men will have to accept that your kind cannot be mass-produced. You'll remain the sole living dragon of the forest, free of their ambitions." She often wondered if, in forging him, they had inadvertently changed the fate of dragons themselves. Could there still be living dragons somewhere in the world? Descendants of the Valyrian line? The rumors that had trickled across the seas were contradictory, but none of that truly mattered. Averix was unique, a living product of the weirwoods, shaped to fight ice with unstoppable flame. She only hoped he could someday live free of the threat that men's fear or envy might pose. At last, the day arrived to travel back to Winterfell for the summit. Nailia and Rill escorted Ihara, Celeria, and two other elders named Phelan and Brome, carrying the wooden bowl of shimmering liquid in a cart. They traveled partly on foot and partly with Averix flying overhead, scouting. Though Ihara was frail with age, she preferred to walk when possible, saying it kept her close to the forest's heartbeat. The pace was slow, but they had set out early enough that they reached Winterfell in time for the meeting. The old castle looked surprisingly bustling. Banners of multiple houses fluttered in the courtyards, from the gray dire wolf of House Stark to lesser-known sigils from corners of the north. Distantly, Nailia saw a stag banner from the Baratheons. Perhaps an envoy had indeed come from the Stormlands, intrigued by talk of a new type of dragon. She suspected more houses might have sent watchers, if not their highest lords. It was a testament to the magnitude of the event. Lord Ivor greeted them at the main gate, a grim smile lighting his scarred features. "You've come," he murmured. "Good." The lords have spent the past few days eyeing each other across the hall, sharing rumors of your demonstration. Tension is high. Best we proceed soon before someone does something foolish. Ahara nodded, leaning on her twisted staff. Lead us where we might do this. But we require an open courtyard with bare earth. The incantation must be done upon the ground. He guided them to an expansive courtyard, newly cleared of training equipment and lined with torch-bearing stands. A wide ring of stones had been placed in the center to mark the demonstration area. Overlooked by Bat Clements and the great hall's windows, it was large enough to contain an assembly of watchers while also giving the children space to perform their rites. The air was crisp, and overhead the sky threatened another flurry of snow. Yet the crowd brimming around the courtyard was thick. Cloaked figures of all shapes and sizes, lords, knights, envoys, perhaps even a few maesters. Naelia's heart fluttered at the enormity of this gathering. The children of the forest had not stood before so many men in open daylight for centuries, if ever. Near one side, Naelia spied Brandel, the old steward-turned-commander of the Night's Watch, speaking to a group of watchers in black cloaks. He caught her eye and nodded with a small, respectful gesture. Naelia felt relief that he was here, at least one friendly face. A hush fell as Ahara and the other elders carried the bowl into the center of the courtyard. Men craned their necks, wanting a better view of the shimmering fluid. Avarix, perched on a section of wall behind them, drew more than a few anxious glances. But the dragon remained still, watchful, smoke curling from his nostrils. Lord Ivor strode forward, raising a gloved hand for silence. Lords and Guffolk, he called, voice echoing off the stone walls. We gather here at the behest of the children of the forest, who come in peace to demonstrate the final measure of the magic that once forged the dragon Avarix. They have brought it so that we may witness for ourselves that it cannot be replicated, that no legion of dragons can be conjured for conquest or dominion. Let none disturb them while they perform this rite. A ripple of murmurs ran through the crowd. Some lords wore expressions of doubt, others brimming with anticipation. Naelia heard whispered remarks, they're lying, or they'll show a second dragon, or impossible. She swallowed, stepping into the ring with Ril, Celeria, and the others, forming a small circle around Ahara. The elder gently set the bowl on the ground. The shimmering surface of the liquid caught the torchlight, dancing with otherworldly radiance. Ahara lifted her staff, tapping it softly against the earth. Her voice, frail yet carrying a resonant undertone, began chanting in that ancient tongue older than men's memory. A hush descended as the crowd listened, entranced by the strange cadence. Ril and Celeria joined in, weaving a harmonic chant that rose and fell like a slow breath of wind. Naelia felt the familiar tingle of old magic stirring in her veins. She added her voice, letting the words of invocation flow. The earth beneath them seemed to pulse. The fluid in the bowl began to glow more brightly, swirling with green luminescence. Ahara paused her chanting and beckoned to Celeria, who carefully lifted a small wooden figurine, a carved shape reminiscent of a lizard no bigger than a child's forearm. She placed it on the ground beside the bowl. Then Ahara resumed chanting. The figurine began to vibrate as though responding to the power that emanated from the liquid. Men around the circle leaned forward, eyes wide. A faint wisp of vapor rose from the bowl, drifting over the lizard figurine. The shape took on an odd, half-living sheen. Its wooden surface rippled like bark in a storm, cracks forming along the spine. Something akin to a heartbeat resonated in the courtyard, thrumming in everyone's ears. The watchers gasped. Slowly, spindly limbs began to move as though the figurine were waking from slumber. It lifted its head, revealing two hollow eye sockets that glowed with faint green fire. A collective murmur spread through the crowd. Naelia's heart hammered. She recognized the pattern. This was how the forging of Avarix had begun, albeit on a far smaller scale. But unlike that night in the forest, there would be no massive infusion of magical energy to give it full life. This was a partial demonstration, an echo of the miracle. Even so, the untrained eye might see it as something wondrous. The wooden lizard construct slowly stood on shaky legs. Its tail, shaped of twisted twigs, dragged along the ground. The green luminescence wreathed its body in a soft halo. Ahara's chanting rose to a crescendo. The watchers breathed in unison, transfixed by the spectacle. Then, abruptly, the last swirl of essence in the bowl poured itself into the figurine. The lizard's eyes flared a brilliant green, and it opened its mouth as though to roar, but only a thin hiss emerged, more like wind through reeds. Then the glow began to flicker. Tendrils of green light sputtered. Cracks formed. A faint wail echoed in the courtyard, uncanny and mournful. The watchers recoiled, some crying out. With a final sputter of that green luminescence, the figurine collapsed. Bits of wood fell from the trunk, dissolving into pale dust. The lizard shape slumped into a pile of inert splinters. At the same moment, the bowl went dark, its once shimmering fluid now a gray residue clinging to the bottom. The chanting ceased. An eerie hush reigned. The watchers, men of power and station, stared in shock. Ahara, panting lightly, bent down to lift the empty bowl. "It is done," she said in a carrying voice that defied her frailty. "What little remained of the forging essence is spent. This small demonstration is all we can muster, and even that leaves us drained. You have seen it with your own eyes. There will be no more dragons of the forest's making." A chorus of murmurs broke out. Some men frowned, uncertain whether to believe. Others looked unnerved by the half-alive figurine that had crumbled to ash. A few in the throng seemed outraged, as though disappointed they had not witnessed something more spectacular. Lord Ivor stepped forward, scanning the assembled lords. "You see the truth," he said firmly. "No more dragons can be forged. Let us not harass the children of the forest with demands they cannot fulfill, nor threaten them in hopes of forcing secrets they do not possess." He gestured to the empty bowl. "This is the proof." For a moment it seemed as though the matter was settled. Then a man's voice rang out from the crowd, sharp, accusing. "And how do we know they haven't hidden more of that fluid to conjure beasts in secret and use them against us?" Heads turned. The speaker was a lord wearing a sigil of a flayed man on his cloak, House Bolton's older line, presumably a cousin or distant relative of Lord Ivor. He stared with narrowed eyes, ignoring the glare his clan leader shot him. They conjured that thing. Why not an army? Rill's face hardened. "We do not traffic in lies," he said quietly. "What you saw was the last dregs of that ancient power. Even forging Avarix nearly destroyed us. This demonstration was all we could bear. Believe what you will, but be warned. If men come to the deep forest seeking to tear apart our homes in search of more, we will defend ourselves. Our dragon stands with us." The man sneered, but before he could retort, a different voice, calmer yet commanding, cut in. "You question the sincerity of those who saved us all?" The speaker was Brandel. He stood with a slight limp, arms folded, scanning the crowd. "Ask any member of the Night's Watch who stood on the wall that night. Ask the soldiers who saw the Night King undone by the dragon's flame. If the children of the forest sought to conquer or destroy, they had every chance to do so after that victory. Instead, they vanished back into their woods, leaving men free to rebuild. Their motivations have been proven honorable." That statement resonated with many watchers, especially those who had fought in the war. Grudgingly, the dissenting lord fell silent. Attention remained, but it ebbed, replaced by uneasy acceptance among most. Ahara turned to Lord Ivor. "We have kept our promise. We have shown the last spark of forging. We trust you will uphold your vow to keep men from hunting our people or seeking more dragons." He bowed his head respectfully. "You have my word, elder. Let all here bear witness." He surveyed the crowd. "Our peace with the children of the forest stands. Let no man break it, or we risk war not only with them, but with the dragon who saved us from the long night." Nyalia felt a subtle easing in her chest. Perhaps this would suffice. True, some men would remain suspicious or ambitious. But at least publicly they had demonstrated that the forging was over, that nothing more could be gleaned from harassing the children. She looked up to Avarix, perched on the battlements. He spread his wings, letting out a low, rumbling call that echoed across the courtyard, neither menacing nor meek, but regal, a living testament to what had been accomplished. In that moment, applause and murmurs of astonished relief spread among the watchers. Some lords began to drift forward, perhaps hoping for a closer look at the now empty bowl or the ashes of the figurine. Others exchanged wary glances. The summit's tension was diffusing, replaced by a sense of finality. As the gathering broke into clusters of whispered commentary, men parted ways. Some left the courtyard to talk politics in side halls or to share their astonishment over ale in the great hall. Nyalia stood with Ahara, Rill, and Celeria, bracing for any immediate confrontations. A few curious onlookers approached, politely asking about the nature of the forging or praising the children for saving them from the White Walkers. Ahara answered in measured tones, giving away little. The vital knowledge, how to channel forest flame into living scale, remained theirs alone. The day wore on. Lord Ivor declared a feast of sorts to celebrate closure on this vexed question. Whole boars and spitted venison roasted over crackling fires, a meager but earnest feast, for the realm was still in partial recovery from the war. The great hall filled with a subdued revelry, more tense than joyous, for many conflicts still brewed in the wider realm. Still, the presence of the forest's champions, the children and their dragon, was a reminder of unity born from crisis. Wine flowed freely. Songs drifted among the rafters, some praising Avarix with flowery new ballads. Others recalled the final battle at the wall. Nyalia found the crush of bodies overwhelming, so she lingered at the periphery. Ril and Celeria similarly gravitated to the edges of the hall, though occasionally they accepted toasts from curious lords or knights. Ehara quietly excused herself, her advanced age weary of the throng. She retreated to a quieter chamber arranged for the children's rest. That left Nailia alone with her thoughts, nursing a cup of watered wine she scarcely tasted. To her mild surprise, Brandel approached. He had shed his black cloak for a more formal tunic, though still in the Night's Watch colors. He inclined his head. "I hope you'll forgive the intrusion," he said quietly. "I wanted to thank you again for what you and Avarix did. The Watch is rebuilding now with the undead threat gone, but many of us still struggle with nightmares. Some remain stationed at the wall, uncertain if stragglers might return." His gaze dropped. "I heard rumors that a handful of White Walkers survived or at least vanished. I wondered if your people had sensed anything in the far north." Nailia felt a flicker of unease. Indeed, the forest's whispers had occasionally spoken of faint presences skulking in the frozen wastes. The White Walkers' hold on undeath had broken, but some might remain, rudderless, desperately clinging to old powers. "We have not confirmed anything," she admitted. "But I believe it's possible. If so, they're too weak to pose a threat on the same scale. Perhaps they lurk like wounded predators, no longer unstoppable. Still, caution is wise." He nodded, shoulders slumping in relief. "Thank you. Even a battered foe can be deadly to a lone ranger. We'll remain vigilant." A faint smile tugged at his lips. Strange to think the Watch might finally find a quieter purpose, guarding against bandits or wildling raids or simply manning the wall as tradition. "After what we've endured, it's almost anticlimactic." Nailia mulled his words, then asked, "Do you plan to remain at the Watch? Many men might see new opportunities in a changing realm." Brandel chuckled softly. "I swore an oath, for good or ill. With the White Walkers gone, some might argue the oath no longer matters. But me? My life is the Watch. We still have a role, even if it's not as large as the war forced upon us." His gaze lingered on her, eyes flicking briefly to the small leaves embroidered in her cloak. "What of you? Will you vanish into the forest again, or stay in touch with us? We owe your people a debt." Nailia lowered her gaze. "Once we're certain men accept the truce, we'll likely return north. The forest needs tending. The forging took its toll on the old growth. But we'll have watchers in the realm of men as we always have. If danger stirs, we'll know." She hesitated, then offered a faint smile. "That does not mean we close the door to friendly contact. Perhaps we can find a way to share tidings now and then so neither side is left in ignorance." He bowed politely. "That would be welcome. If you need assistance, let the Watch know. Though we are few, we remember our friends." Their conversation ended when a small group of northern lords ambled over, seeking either to speak with Nailia or to corner Brandel about some matter of duty. She excused herself, slipping away from the feast entirely. The noise and press of bodies felt suffocating. Instead, she stepped out into the courtyard, greeted by a crisp night air laced with the smell of smoke from cooking fires. Torches gleamed along the walls. Above, the sky was a deep black, sprinkled with stars, no longer veiled by thick winter clouds as often as before. In the corner, she saw Avarix perched near a watchtower, partly hidden in shadow. Even from here, she sensed his steady presence. She was not alone for long. Ril emerged from the hall soon after, wearing a pensive look. "I never imagined the day would come when we would stand openly among so many men," he murmured. "Nor that we'd share a feast in their halls. Our ancestors hid from them for centuries. Now here we are, forging truces." Nailia laughed softly, though there was little mirth. "It's a strange era, but if it spares the forest more pain and spares men from needless fear, maybe it's worth it." He touched her shoulder gently. "You've carried a heavy burden since we forged Avarix. Ehara sees it. We all see it. Are you all right?" She exhaled. "I don't know. Part of me yearns to go back to a simple life among the trees, foraging for berries, communing with the weirwoods. Another part warns me that the realm has changed forever and that we can't simply fade into legend again. If men do something foolish, like searching for more magic or letting fear warp their hearts, they might tear the forest apart looking for an advantage. Then we'd be at war. I dread that possibility." Ril's hand slipped away, resting at his side. "I share your fear, but perhaps men have learned. They saw what this magic can do, and they saw that it cost you as well. Let's hope that is enough to stay their hands." A soft rumble drifted across the courtyard as Avarix shifted, stretching his wings. The torchlight flickered on his scales, highlighting the swirling patterns of leaf and bark that formed his ridges. Nailia turned her gaze to him. In the end, he was the greatest testament to their intentions. He had saved countless lives in the battle against the Night King. He had proven that the forest's magic could stand beside men, not above them. If men still chose to fear or covet him, that was on them. Her hope lay in forging a mutual respect. Late that night, while the rest of Winterfell caroused or slept, Nailia, Rill, and Celeria slipped away to a quieter part of the castle where the children had been offered modest quarters. Ehara was already there, dozing on a cot. Nailia sank onto a stool, letting exhaustion wash over her. She was on the verge of drifting to sleep when a faint prickle of cold made her shiver. She looked around, puzzling over the sudden chill. The chamber was relatively warm from the coals in a brazier. Yet the hair on her arms stood on end. She rose quietly, crossing to the small window that overlooked part of the courtyard. Moonlight washed the stones with silver. Everything seemed still. As she watched, though, she felt a presence, faint as a whisper on the wind, a sense of something not quite alive, nor wholly dead. The memory of the White Walker's cold aura rippled in her mind. She recalled Brandel's concern about stragglers. Could one be lingering near Winterfell? It made little sense. Why would a White Walker come here now, surrounded by men with a living dragon perched on the ramparts? Nailia tried to push the notion aside. Perhaps it was simply her own lingering fear or some echo of magic from the forging demonstration. She forced herself to breathe calmly, to center her senses in the old ways the children used to read the forest. She tried to hear the rustle of leaves, the murmur of ancient roots. Instead, she heard only faint wind and the indistinguishable movements of castle guards. She told herself it was nothing. Still, sleep came fitfully. She dreamed of swirling snow and a tall figure crowned with ice, though she knew the Night King was gone. In the dream, she sensed a distant presence, weaker but still malevolent, drifting across an endless tundra of shattered bones. When she woke, the faint light of dawn seeped under the door. She shook off the dream, reminding herself of their victory. That morning, the children prepared to depart Winterfell. Their mission was complete, and they had little desire to linger among men any longer than necessary. Lord Ivar offered them provisions and once again thanked them for all they had done. The curiosity of the men was insatiable, but the children deflected questions politely. Some tried to gain audience with Ehara, hoping for glimpses of the deeper magic. She refused, her expression polite but firm. There was nothing more to show. They left by midday with Rill leading the cart that bore Ehara. Celeria walked alongside, scanning the ramparts with wary eyes. Nailia stood atop the walls with Avarix, about to mount him for the flight north. The courtyard below bustled with men going about their daily tasks. She took in one last view of Winterfell, a fortress that had become a crossroads of the realm's fate. She had a sense that they would cross paths with men again, for good or ill. But for now, the forest called them back. They soared above the gates, a few watchers saluting from the towers. Snow whipped across the open fields beyond. In the distance, half-melted drifts shimmered in the sunlight. Spring was not yet here, but the worst of winter's freeze seemed to be receding. The crisp air tasted of change. Nailia guided Avarix in broad circles, scanning the horizon for the others. Rill was a small figure on the road, leading the group at a steady pace. Assured all was well, she urged Avarix to glide north. She wanted to scout ahead, ensure no one lurked in ambush, though an attack on the children so soon after the summit seemed unlikely. They moved deeper into the countryside, farmland giving way to scattered pines. The day wore on, the sun sinking lower. She decided to rejoin her companions on foot. Avarix landed near a bend in the road where a cluster of evergreens offered some shelter from the wind. She found the cart and resumed traveling with them, exchanging updates on the quiet roads. They encountered few travelers, only a handful of peasants lugging belongings in rickety wagons. Some recognized the children and the dragon, bowing in GRA. Titted for the service in the war. Others simply gaped, frightened or awed. One old woman pressed a carved trinket into Nailia's hand, wordlessly, then hobbled away. Nailia held it up to see it was a tiny wolf figurine, perhaps a charm for safe passage. She tucked it in her cloak, touched by the gesture. On the second night of travel, they camped in the lee of a rocky outcrop, building a small fire. The wind howled in the trees. Ehara dozed in the cart. Rill and Celeria sat by the fire, warming their hands. Avarix curled around them like a protective watchman, eyes half-lidded but ears alert for any threat. Nailia nibbled on dried fruit, her thoughts drifting. Suddenly, that cold prickle returned, the same feeling she had in Winterfell. Her gut tightened. She set down her meal and stood, scanning the darkness. The stars were visible above, sharp pinpricks. The wind rattled the branches. She sensed no immediate presence, but the air felt wrong, as though the warmth of the night were being siphoned away in pockets. She stepped a few paces into the darkness, peering between trees. At first, she saw nothing, only shifting shadows. Then, in a fleeting glimpse of moonlight, she thought she saw a figure. It stood motionless at the edge of the clearing, pale as bone, tall as a man, though perhaps leaner. A flicker of reflection caught in its eyes. Then the shape vanished, merging with the gloom. Her blood ran cold. She swallowed, taking a slow step forward. "Show yourself," she whispered in the old tongue. No answer came. The wind died to a whisper. For a moment, she was certain she felt that same aura of unnatural cold. Then it faded, leaving only the night's chill. She spun, hurrying back to the fire. Rill and Celeria noticed her tense expression. "What is it?" Rill asked, half rising. Nailia explained what she thought she saw. Their faces grew grim. Celeria laid a hand on her bow. "Could it be a White Walker?" "That's impossible, they wouldn't just stand there without attacking or raising whites." Nailia shook her head. "Perhaps a remnant. Or something else. But I felt it." She turned to watch Avarix. The dragon's eyes glowed faintly green in the firelight. He raised his head as though sensing her disquiet. "Either way, we should keep a vigilant watch." They did, but nothing appeared. By dawn, the tension faded, replaced by puzzlement. Had it been her imagination? A trick of the moonlight? Yet she knew better than to dismiss her instincts. Something was out there, intangible and fleeting, but real enough to prickle the wards in her mind. The days passed, and they moved ever deeper into the old forest. Once they crossed a certain threshold, the land grew wild with ancient trees. Moss blanketed the ground, muffling their footsteps. The wind in the boughs sounded like distant whispers. Here, the children felt more at home. Ehara, revitalized by the forest's presence, left the cart to walk on her own, leaning on her staff. Even the air smelled richer, saturated with loam and growth. It reminded Nailia of a time long before the forging, when her life had revolved around the quiet communion with the weirwoods. They reached a broad clearing ringed by old oaks where Ehara called a halt. This was close to their stronghold, but not so near that men might stumble across it. Above, crows circled lazily, letting out the occasional caw. The children began constructing a temporary shelter for Ehara, gathering leaves and branches to weave a roof. Avarix perched on a fallen log, tail flicking idly. A sense of calm settled over them at last. That evening, as dusk fell, they lit a small fire and shared a modest meal of nuts and dried berries. Ehara told stories of her youth, stories older than many realms, of how the children had once roamed vast stretches of forest that no longer existed. The younger ones listened with solemn interest. Overhead, the sky darkened to a deep violet, the first stars winking into view. The hush felt peaceful, but Nailia's mind kept drifting to that figure she had glimpsed. She peered beyond the circle of firelight, scanning the dim silhouettes of tree trunks. Then a snap of a twig made her tense. She turned, hand going to the dagger at her belt. Rill and Celeria did the same, eyes narrowed. Ehara stilled, her old senses pricked. Nailia rose slowly to her feet. "Who's there?" she called in the common tongue, though softly. "Come forward." A shape stepped from behind an oak. Nailia's breath caught. It looked like a man, but the faint flicker of firelight revealed details that made her blood run cold. The figure's skin was pale, tinged with a bluish cast. His hair was ragged, half-frozen, and his eyes glowed with the faintest hue of ice. But he was not a white, nor a White Walker. She saw the faint movement of breath in his chest, the subtle trembling in his limbs as though from mortal fatigue. His gaze flicked around the circle, and then he lifted both hands in a show of surrender. His voice came out in a raspy croak. "Please, don't kill me." Rill and Celeria hesitated, exchanging a look. Ehara's eyes narrowed in wary curiosity. Nailia took a small step forward, but kept her hand on the dagger. "You are alive?" she asked, her mind whirling. "Who was he? A deserter from some northern clan? A man stricken with frostbite?" He nodded shakily. "Alive, yes. But changed." He coughed, a wet sound. "I was taken by a White Walker, further north. Long before the final battle. They did things. Tried to turn me. But I escaped. I wandered half-dead in the snow. Something about their ritual didn't complete." He glanced at his arms, which bore patches of thin, frost-crusted skin. "I'm neither living nor dead, I think." Nailia felt a wash of pity and horror. If he had been seized by the others, it was possible they had begun the process of transformation, infusing him with that cold essence. But the Night King's demise might have severed the link, leaving him in a twisted limbo. "Does it hurt?" she asked softly. He let out a bitter laugh. "It's cold. Always cold. But less so once I came south. And then I sensed your dragon's warmth somehow. From leagues away. I followed it. He paused, swaying on his feet. "I can't go to men. They'd kill me as a monster. I hoped." The children of the forest might understand. Might help. Ril's dagger hand relaxed a fraction. Celeria shot a questioning look at Ahara, who rose with surprising steadiness for her age, leaning on her staff. She approached the stranger, gold eyes studying him intently. He tensed, but did not back away, as though he had accepted whatever might come. Ahara lifted a small gnarled hand and placed it on his chest. He hissed softly at the contact, but did not resist. A faint glow pulsed around her fingertips, as though she were testing the nature of the magic within him. When she withdrew, her expression was grim yet compassionate. She turned to the others. He bears traces of the White Walker's power in his blood, but his heart still beats. He is not fully lost. Her gaze drifted to Nailia. We are no strangers to healing craft, but this is no ordinary illness. It is half a curse, an echo of the other's corruption left incomplete. I do not know if we can free him from it. The stranger's eyes flickered with desperate hope. But you can try? Ahara drew a slow breath. We can attempt some remedies, yes, but it will not be easy. And if the corruption lingers too long, it may devour the last of your humanity. Ril spoke softly. We should consider if it's safe. Could he harm us if the White Walker power resurges? The man shook his head vehemently. No, I have no desire to harm you, but sometimes I can feel the cold creeping into my thoughts, like a voice urging me to kill or spread the frost. I fight it. That's why I came here, to beg for help. If you turn me away, eventually I might lose control. Nailia recalled the stories of how the White Walkers had turned living men into new walkers, forging something monstrous. This man might be on the cusp of that transformation. The question was, could the forest's magic, the same that spawned Ave Rix, burn away the lingering frost? Or would it consume the man along with it? She did not know. Ahara beckoned. Sit by the fire. Let us see if the warmth helps quell the frost in your blood. He obeyed, though clearly uneasy. As he inched nearer, the temperature around him dropped a fraction, as though a personal aura of cold clung to him. The flames sputtered a bit, as if recoiling from the presence. But they did not go out. The man sank to the ground, legs trembling. He looked half-starved, with hollow cheeks and cracked lips. Celeria quietly fetched a cup of warm broth from their supply. She handed it to him warily. He drank it, wincing as though it burned. In a sense, it likely did, if that frosty power still clung to his throat. But he managed a few sips, color faintly returning to his pallid face. Ahara watched with an unreadable expression. Ril hovered, uncertain whether to ready a weapon or offer more help. At last Nailia spoke. What is your name? He stared at her as though he had forgotten how to answer. Then he said, I was called Farron, from a little hamlet near the Bay of Seals. It no longer stands. He swallowed, eyes distant. I lost everything. That's when they took me. Nailia nodded slowly. Farron, I'm Nailia. You are safe here for the moment. We will see if we can help you. But you must promise not to harm anyone if that cold voice resurfaces. He pressed his lips together. I promise. I will fight it. Then he took another careful sip of broth, wincing again. Ave Rix stirred behind them, turning his great head to watch Farron with a piercing golden gaze. The man stiffened under the dragon's scrutiny. Nailia reached out a hand, resting it on Avrix's flank. The dragon let out a low rumble, neither threatening nor welcoming, more a note of guarded curiosity. Perhaps he sensed the remnant of that dreadful ice within Farron. The wards that protected Ave Rix from corruption might also repel the faint aura that clung to the man. Ahara lowered herself to a seat beside Farron, tapping the butt of her staff on the ground. We will see what can be done at dawn. For now, rest and eat if you can. The journey to our deeper forest healing glades is not short. He bowed his head in gratitude, tears welling in his eyes. Thank you. With that, an uneasy quiet settled. The children kept watch all night, rotating shifts. Celeria sat near Farron. Arrow knocked on the off chance he lost control. He never stirred from the fitful doze he fell into. Once or twice, He whimpered in his sleep, and a faint layer of frost formed on the ground around him, only to melt when he calmed. Nailia shivered at the sight. This man was living proof that the White Walker's evil still lingered in some form. She wondered how many more like him might be wandering the wastes or the edges of civilization, half-turned, searching for help or succumbing to madness. Come morning, Farron managed some half-solid food. He seemed more lucid if weak. Ihara pronounced him stable enough to travel. So they loaded him gently onto the cart, bundling him in furs to offset his own unnatural chill, and resumed their journey deeper into the forest. Averix flew overhead or walked at a cautious distance, nose twitching whenever he caught Farron's scent. Despite the man's plight, they could not ignore the risk. If the corruption inside him flared, they would have to act swiftly. Progress was slow, the forest's undergrowth thick. Yet eventually, they came upon another clearing, this one dominated by a towering weirwood, its trunk etched with a solemn face. A ring of standing stones encircled it, carved with runes older than any living memory. This was one of the sacred healing glades the children used in times of great need. Moss covered the stones, and a hush lay over the place, broken only by the faint trickle of a nearby spring. Light filtered through the canopy in shifting patterns, giving the scene an otherworldly glow. Ihara directed them to lay Farron at the base of the weirwood. He shivered violently, hugging himself despite the layered furs. Rill and Celeria gathered small bundles of herbs from hidden caches near the stones. Ihara inspected them, discarding some, mixing others. Nailia stood by, glancing from Farron's haggard face to the weirwood's carved eyes. She felt the ancient presence in the trunk, a reservoir of memory and possibility. Perhaps, just perhaps, this place could drive out the lingering ice. At Ihara's instruction, they formed a circle around Farron, sprinkling a circle of powdered herbs that glowed faintly green in the dappled light. They lit small braziers, the smoke carrying a pungent yet oddly soothing scent. Farron's breath came in ragged gasps, sweat beading on his brow even as his skin remained unnaturally cold to the touch. Ihara knelt at his side, her staff laid across her lap, chanting quietly. The runes on the standing stones reacted, faint lines of light crawling along their carved surfaces. Nailia felt a ripple of power stir in the earth, reminiscent of the forging but gentler, more organic. Averix watched from just beyond the circle, head low, as though sensing this was not his place to intrude. Nailia joined hands with Rill and Celeria, focusing on the chant. She let the old tongue flow through her, calling on the forest's hidden flame, the same warmth that gave life to leaves and blossoms, the vital energy that had formed Averix. But they did not attempt a grand forging. Instead, they guided that warmth into Farron's body, coaxing it to burn away the frost that clung to his blood. Farron cried out, arching his back. Frost crackled along the ground, then melted. His eyes snapped open, and for an instant, they flashed bright blue, as though the White Walker's power were flaring in defiance. Ihara pressed her palm to his forehead, chanting with renewed urgency. The circle of powdered herbs burst into green sparks. A swirl of wind ruffled the clearing, sending leaves spiraling. The weirwood groaned softly, as though lending its strength. Nailia sensed a fierce tug-of-war taking place, the forest flame wrestling with the glacial residue in Farron's veins. Time blurred. Farron's screams melted into ragged sobs, then silence. The circle of powder burned itself out, leaving only smoldering lines in the dirt. Ihara sank back, panting, lines of sweat on her brow. Rill and Celeria gasped for breath, drained by the intensity of the ritual. Nailia's limbs trembled. She forced her eyes to focus on Farron, lying motionless on the ground. Had they succeeded, or had the frost consumed him? Then Farron stirred, exhaling a long breath. Color, actual living color, began returning to his cheeks. His eyelids fluttered open, revealing eyes no longer tinged with blue, but a warm hazel. His lips parted, and he whispered, I can feel it. The cold is gone. He pressed a hand to his chest, half disbelieving. Ihara's own eyes slid shut in relief. We have severed the White Walker's hold, she murmured, but you must rest. Your body needs time to heal from the remnants. A ripple of joyous astonishment spread among the children. Even Ril, who had doubted the risk, smiled. They had done what once seemed impossible, undone the partial turning of a living man. It spoke to the potency of the forest's magic in this new era. Perhaps forging the dragon had awakened deeper reserves of power than they realized, or perhaps the fading remains of the White Walker's magic had weakened enough to be expelled. Either way, they had saved Farron from an eternal curse. He lay there, tears streaming down his cheeks, half laughing, half weeping. "Thank you," he whispered over and over. Nailia stepped forward, sinking to her knees beside him. She offered a waterskin, which he drank from shakily. Even as she marveled at their success, a sobering thought crossed her mind. If one man had been found in such a half-turned state, there might be others. Some might be beyond rescue, lost in the remotest corners of the north. What if this was just the first sign that the White Walker's defeat had not been as total as they hoped? The magic might linger in unsuspecting victims. She forced herself to stay focused on the present. One life saved. One soul reclaimed from the chill. Ihara used the last of her strength to bless the circle, ensuring no trace of the White Walker's power remained. Then she nodded to Ril. "Help him rest near the weirwood. The old gods will watch over him tonight." As the evening settled in, they made a small camp in the glade. Farron lay on blankets near the weirwood, sleeping more peacefully than he had in ages. Ihara, exhausted, also fell into a deep slumber. Ril and Celeria rummaged for more herbs to restock their supplies. Nailia sat by the smoldering brazier, wide awake, feeling the swirl of questions. She gazed at Avarix, who rested with his head pillowed on his foreclaws, eyes half closed. He exhaled a soft breath that smelled faintly of pine and earth. In the hush, she thought about how this healing might change everything. If men learned the children could cure partial turning, would that lead them to flood the forest with pleas, or worse, demands? No doubt some souls were desperate to save friends or family from any lingering icy corruption. But this magic was not easy, nor guaranteed. The forest was not an infirmary for the realm. The potential for strife weighed heavily on her mind. Ril appeared behind her, crouching to place a hand on her shoulder. "You're worried," he murmured. She nodded. "If men discover we can do this, we'll be bombarded with requests. Some might not be so polite. They'll see it as power to claim or a resource to exploit. And yet, how can we deny help to those who truly suffer?" He sighed. "That is the burden we bear in forging these new paths. Perhaps we must limit what we do or require men to approach us under strict conditions like an invitation or a vow. We cannot let them turn our forest into a battleground of desperation." She looked at Farron's sleeping form. He was a victim and we saved him. But if more come, can we save them all? Or is there a limit to how many times we can chase away that frost? Ril had no easy answer. He only squeezed her shoulder gently. "We'll face these trials as they come. One step at a time." Days passed. Farron regained strength. Though the forest's enchantment still lingered in him, dissolving the last traces of frost, his body healed quickly. The transformation scars on his skin receded, leaving only faint patches of pallor. He began moving about the glade under supervision, fetching water from the spring, gathering kindling. His gratitude toward the children was clear in every gesture. He offered to serve them, to repay the life they'd returned to him. Ihara told him gently he need not pledge himself as a servant, but she understood the impulse. Meanwhile, life in the forest began to shift toward normalcy. The southern roads quieted, men returning to their typical concerns. The weather eased, with more frequent thaws. Word reached them through quiet channels that the newly anointed king in the north was consolidating his seat at Winterfell, forging alliances with the Vale, the Riverlands, and possibly making peace with the Iron Islands. The realm, it seemed, was stabilizing. The threat of immediate strife over forging new dragons had abated. Yet Nailia felt a subtle tension whenever she wandered the glade alone, as though an unseen presence sometimes lurked at the edges of her vision. She could not shake the memory of that fleeting cold she'd sensed near Winterfell or the shape that Fli peered in the darkness. Ril and Celeria had noticed nothing out of the ordinary on their scouting forays, aside from the usual wolves and boars. Ihara insisted that the old god's eyes in the weirwoods had glimpsed no White Walker infiltration. But Nailia could not dismiss the sense that something remained amiss. One afternoon, while Farron helped gather fresh reeds near the stream, Nailia ventured deeper into the forest alone. She followed a winding path marked by half-buried stones, letting her instincts guide her. The canopy overhead rustled softly, a persistent hush. She came upon a small pond ringed by tangled roots, the water reflecting the leaf-latticed sky above. Kneeling at its edge, she cupped her hands and splashed her face, the coldness bracing. For a moment, the forest's hush enveloped her. She let out a slow breath. Then a ripple crossed the water's surface. She froze, expecting to see a fish. Instead, the reflection shifted to reveal a phantom shape behind her. Tall, gaunt, with eyes that glittered a faint blue. Her heart lurched. She whirled, dagger in hand. No one stood behind her. The branches were empty. Yet the reflection in the water had been unmistakable. A faint whisper, like wind over ice, seemed to brush her ear, then vanished. She realized her hand was shaking. Slowly, she sheathed the dagger. Was she being haunted by the memory of the White Walkers? Or was some remnant truly following her? Unseen? Felt too real to be mere imagination. The sense of presence lingered, like a specter in the gloom. She recalled how the Night King had once been rumored to watch his enemies from afar, sending whites or lesser walkers as scouts. But that king was gone, destroyed by Avrix's flame. Could another have taken his place? The prospect sent chills down her spine. The entire might of the White Walkers had been undone. Surely no successor could reassemble that power, unless a single White Walker with cunning and time tried to reclaim a fraction of the lost magic, or found a new method. She returned to the glade and spoke quietly of her experience to Ahara and the others. They listened with furrowed brows. Rill insisted on scouting the perimeter, and they found no trace of footprints or unnatural frost. Nonetheless, a wary vigilance took root among the children. Farron, hearing rumors of the sightings, grew pale. If one of them still hunts you, it might be for the same reason they hunted me. They want to transform or kill anything connected to the dragon's forging. They might see your power as a threat or a resource for their own ends. Nailia considered that, if a White Walker indeed roamed the forest, it might be trying to glean how they had created a beast immune to ice. Perhaps it hoped to replicate or undo the wards that protected Avrix. She refused to let fear dominate her thoughts, but caution was necessary. They agreed to keep Avrix close, instructing him to remain within the glade's boundaries at night when illusions and strange presences were strongest. Another quiet week slipped by. Farron's condition improved further, and he began discussing what he would do with his renewed life. "I have no kin left," he said sadly one evening, poking the campfire's embers. "No village to return to. Perhaps I'll travel to some town in the south, start anew. But I'm reluctant to leave this forest after all you've done." Celeria smiled gently. "You're free to stay a while, but men do not often thrive among us in the long term. Our ways are different, and the forest can be unkind to those who do not hear its voice." He acknowledged that with a nod. Nailia sensed his inner conflict. He was profoundly grateful yet unmoored. A man out of place, carrying faint scars from an unholy transformation. In a way, he represented a new link between men and the children, bridging the gap through an experience none would wish for. She mused that perhaps he could become an intermediary or an agent of peace if, in time, he found the right path. But that was a future for him to decide. On a crisp dawn, as the golden light threaded through the canopy, the quiet routine of the glade was shattered by a shout. One of the children, Linen, a younger scout, burst into the clearing, panting. Her eyes shone with alarm, cheeks flushed. "Nailia," she called. "All of you, there's something you must see, not far from here." She could hardly catch her breath. A traveler from the north, dead, half frozen, but not a white. More like part-turned, I think. Alarm shot through Nailia. She and the others exchanged grim looks. Ahara's face hardened. In short order, they gathered what they needed and followed Linen through the forest. A short trek brought them to a narrow path where the trees parted to reveal a small clearing dotted with frost-laced grass. There, a figure lay face down, motionless. The air was distinctly colder around the body. Rill approached carefully, dragonglass knife in hand. He knelt and turned the figure over. It was a man older than Farron, with a gray-streaked beard. His eyes were open, glazed with a faint hint of bluish ice. The flesh of his arms and chest bore the same half-frozen corruption. But unlike Farron, this man had not escaped in time. His expression was contorted in agony, lips parted as though in a silent plea. Ahara touched his skin, shook her head sadly. "He's gone. Too far gone to save. Yet he is not a white. It's as if the transformation was incomplete and death took him before it finished." Nailia felt a surge of pity. Another victim. She glanced around the clearing. There were footprints in the frosted grass, as though he had collapsed mid-stride. He must have stumbled all this way trying to find help. Maybe he sensed the forest's warmth as Farron did. Farron stood a short distance away, pallid. So I wasn't alone. Others must have been taken or partially turned. They're out there, dying or succumbing. His voice trembled. And some might not make it in time. The situation was worse than they feared. The possibility of scattered half-turned individuals trickling south, seeking aid or turning monstrous, threatened the fragile peace. If word spread that the children had a cure, an exodus might flood the forest, or men might accuse them of harboring half-White Walkers. Tensions could explode. Naelia's stomach knotted. The war against the dead might be over, but its echoes still bled into the living world. They solemnly burned the body in a pyre, ensuring it would not rise as a white by any chance. The frost took time to melt away even in the flames, an eerie testament to the potency of that corruption. Smoke curled into the sky, and the faint odor of burned flesh clung to the clearing. Naelia stood with arms folded, fighting the nauseating sense that the White Walker's shadow lingered. When they returned to the glade, Ahara gathered everyone. "We must decide how to proceed," she said gravely. "If more half-turned wanderers come, do we attempt to save them all? Our resources are limited. The healing glade cannot withstand an endless stream of such curses. Nor can we invite hundreds of men to roam our woods." Celeria frowned. "But can we turn them away to die? That would be cruel and might sow hatred if word spreads that we refuse them." Rill shook his head. "Let's not forget the vantage of men. If we open the forest to all, some will come seeking other powers. Others might come out of fear or prejudice, thinking the half-turned are a new threat. Chaos will follow." Naelia pressed a hand to her forehead, feeling the weight of an impossible choice. "We need a plan. Perhaps we can set up a small outpost near the edge of the forest, a controlled place where half-turned can be brought for potential healing. That would keep them from wandering in on their own. But who would manage it? We are too few to maintain such a station." Farron cleared his throat, drawing hesitant attention. "I would volunteer," he said quietly. "I know what it's like to be in that limbo. Maybe I can guide them. Warn them about the dangers, teach them what your people did for me. If there's a chance to save even a few more, I should be part of it." Naelia studied him, heart-stirred by his courage. "But men might fear or distrust you if they see your scars." He offered a weary smile. "Some might, but others might see I survived the White Walker's curse. That might give them hope. If the outpost is near the forest's edge, maybe some of you can come occasionally to do the healing rites. I can organize a system of watchers or gather support from men who also believe in this cause." Ahara tapped her staff, expression thoughtful. "It's a risk, but perhaps a necessary one. Still, I doubt we can heal every soul who has been half-turned. The forest's power is not infinite. And we must ensure no ill-intentioned souls exploit the sanctuary for other purposes." Rill murmured in agreement. "We need to reach out to the Night's Watch or those lords who might understand. They can help maintain order around this outpost. That would keep masses of people from overrunning it." Naelia realized they were shaping a plan that could become a new form of alliance, a place where the forest's healing met men's organization. It would not be easy nor safe from suspicion or malice. But ignoring the problem would only lead to tragedies like the gray-bearded man dying alone in the woods. She turned to Ahara. "Shall we attempt it?" The elder closed her eyes for a moment as though listening to the forest's quiet counsel. Then she nodded. "Yes, we shall. This is the new path before us. Let it be known that the children will send a few of our own to assist, but we cannot devote many. The rest will remain here to safeguard our realm." They set to work on the details. A letter would be sent to Brandel at the Night's Watch, explaining the plan and requesting a small contingent of trustworthy rangers or volunteers to help guard the outpost. Another message would go to Lord Ivor, the king in the north, so he would not view this as a secret operation. Farron would serve as a caretaker or liaison, living on-site to greet any who arrived seeking help. The children would rotate a pair of healers in and out. The location would be chosen near the southern edge of the old forest, close enough for the children to reach swiftly, yet not so deep that travelers would wander lost among the trees. Avarix, as ever, would remain free to roam, but might occasionally appear at the outpost if necessary, a reminder of the forest's might. Naelia volunteered to be among the first to help establish it. She felt a sense of purpose in bridging that gap, though it would take her away from the deeper glades she loved. Rill agreed to accompany her for the initial setup, after which they might rotate with Celeria and others. The next days were a flurry of quiet preparation. Messages were dispatched via swift messengers who knew how to bypass the usual roads. The children scouted potential sites, settling on a small clearing near a wide creek. There, tall pines ringed a space big enough for modest structures, and the creek provided water. It lay about a day's journey from the forest's deeper heart, close enough that a messenger could fetch reinforcements quickly. Farron, determined, helped gather timber and clear brush. The children showed him how to weave living branches for walls that would remain partially rooted, blending with the environment. In time, the outpost began to take shape, a circular enclosure with a few huts for sleeping, a hearth at the center, and a simple earthen barrier around the perimeter. The forest's hush enveloped it while the sunbeams filtered softly through the pine needles. Here, if anywhere, the half-turned might find respite and a chance at healing. Weeks passed in labor and planning. Word arrived that Brandel would send 5 men from the watch, men who had proven flexible and honorable. Lord Ivor, informed of the plan, expressed cautious support, though he warned that not all northern lords would appreciate the existence of a sanctuary for those touched by White Walker magic. Still, he would not oppose it so long as it remained peaceful. At last, the outpost was ready to open. Farron stood at the threshold, gazing at the modest huts with a swirl of emotion in his eyes. "I can't believe we built this," he said softly to Nailia. "If this had existed when I first escaped them, perhaps I wouldn't have had to wander so far, so alone." She smiled gently. "Now others won't face that same terror if they make it here in time." She rested a hand on his shoulder. "You honor your lost village by helping others, Farron." He nodded, swallowing hard. Then he turned to watch as a pair of watchmen emerged from the trees, Brandel's men, newly arrived, each wearing a plain black cloak without heavy armor. One was a lanky youth named Hob, the other a grizzled man called Tormin. They had spent the last few days getting oriented, learning from Rill about the forest's boundaries, the local wildlife, and how best to approach half-turned arrivals. The Watchers were uncertain but willing, grateful to have a meaningful mission now that the undead army was gone. Nailia walked the perimeter, ensuring the wards they set would deter wild animals and let the forest's presence remain strong. A few newly planted saplings stood near the huts, each grown from seeds the children had carried. They would serve as living conduits for the gentle side of weirwood magic, hopefully aiding any future healing rites. Then, just as they were finishing a final inspection, a shout came from the edge of the clearing. "Ho there! Travelers!" Everyone turned. 2 figures stumbled through the underbrush, a man and a woman, both looking desperate and haggard. They wore ragged cloaks. The man's face was etched with fear, while the woman's eyes glistened with tears. They held up their hands in a sign of peace, spotting the Watchers and the dark shape of Avarix perched on a fallen log. "Is this the place?" the man croaked. "We heard rumors that if someone's been touched by the White Walkers, they can get help here." Farron exchanged a look with Nailia. She nodded. Then he stepped forward, raising both hands in greeting. "Yes. This is the sanctuary. Who among you is afflicted?" The man's gaze shifted to the woman who clutched her cloak around her left arm. She winced, pulling back the fabric to reveal a patch of skin that glistened with faint, frost-like patterns. Her lips trembled. "It started after I was scratched by one of those whites. I thought I was free of the curse when the white was killed. But this cold kept spreading." The hush that fell was heavy with unspoken dread. At last, Farron said softly, "You're not alone. Come in. We'll do our best." He glanced at Nailia, who nodded and motioned them forward. The watchman parted to let them pass. The woman gazed up at Avarix, fear mingling with awe at the sight of the green-scaled dragon. She swallowed, then seeing it did not threaten her, hurried to keep pace with Farron. As the newcomers were shown to a hut, Nailia felt a strange mix of hope and worry. This was the future they had chosen, a place where the lingering shadows of the White Walkers could be confronted, one life at a time, with the forest's healing. It was a fragile experiment requiring constant vigilance and trust between men and the children. Yet it also held the promise of bridging that ancient gap more firmly than any treaty or demonstration of forging essence ever could. Days turned into weeks, and soon the outpost saw more arrivals. Not in overwhelming numbers, but a steady trickle of those cursed by half-turned frost or mysterious afflictions from the war. Some were saved by the healing glade's rites, though it taxed the children's energies. Others arrived too late, the cold too entrenched. They died despite all efforts, leaving behind sorrow and a reminder that the White Walker's evil had stained the realm in ways that might never fully heal. In time, rumors spread through the north that the outpost existed, guarded by the Night's Watch and aided by a child of the forest who bore the blessings of a living dragon. Some doubted its existence. Others scoffed, calling it a foolish attempt to fix what was beyond repair. But a growing number of hopeful souls whispered that it offered salvation for those caught in Ice's grip. Gradually, a fragile network of watchers and sympathetic lords steered the afflicted toward it, sometimes traveling great distances. Conflicts arose. A handful of suspicious clans tried to block passage, demanding payment or fearful of new, ice monstrosities. Yet overall, the realm settled into a guarded acceptance. They had survived the apocalypse, now they struggled to mend the scars. Meanwhile, the children in the deeper forest resumed their old ways, watching from afar, ensuring no large-scale intrusion by men. Ahara, though advanced in years, oversaw the coordination of healers traveling between the glade and the outpost. Celeria took her turn stationing there, quietly singing the spells that calmed the frost-laden dreams of the afflicted at night. Rill guided watchers on hunts, forging quiet friendships with men who recognized that the forest was no longer a distant myth but an active ally. Nailia, for her part, found both solace and burden in the outpost. Each successful healing filled her with renewed hope. Each tragedy weighed on her heart. Sometimes she walked the perimeter alone in the twilight, recalling the forging of Avarix, recalling the dread final confrontation above the wall, and wondering if the realm would ever find a true, lasting peace. Yet as she spied families reunited after a mother was cleansed of the creeping cold or a stoic warrior weeping in relief when the ice burned out of his veins, she felt some measure of faith that this was the right path. Avarix often soared above the outpost, a silent guardian. At times, the dragon landed among the huts, letting the afflicted see his leaf-patterned scales, a tangible reminder that not all magic was cruel or devouring. Some found strength in that sight, believing if a forest-born dragon could stand against the greatest ice, perhaps their smaller ailments might also be overcome. Whenever men asked if more dragons would be forged, the children gently repeated their final vow, no more. Avarix alone was the forest's champion. He flew in the memory of all that had been lost and all that had been saved. Occasionally, Nailia caught glimpses of that eerie flicker in the corner of her vision at dusk or dawn, a tall shape with faintly glowing eyes, disappearing before she could focus. She grew convinced a surviving White Walker or shade prowled the edges, observing them. Yet it never attacked and no footprints or ice crystals were found. Perhaps it was a phantom conjured by her lingering fears. Or perhaps something more cunning bided its time, uncertain how to proceed in a world protected by a living dragon. She resolved to remain vigilant, trusting that if it showed itself in earnest, she and the forest would be ready. In this manner, the seasons slowly shifted. Snow melted, revealing fresh growth. Wildflowers sprouted in the meadows near the outpost, and the pines glistened with new green needles. The darkest winter had passed, though the memory of the long nights still haunted many. The realm of men stabilized further under its new leadership, forging uneasy alliances and coping with the aftermath of near cataclysm. In the forest, the children continued their timeless watch, weaving new wards around the weirwoods and training younger generations in the old tongues. And the outpost became a modest but vital beacon of healing, proving that the forest's power could save as well as destroy. Nailia stood one dawn atop a small rise near the outpost, gazing east where the sky blushed pink. A gentle breeze stirred the hair around her pointed ears. She heard the faint sound of someone stirring behind her, Farron, no doubt, rising early to tend the morning fires or greet any travelers who might arrive at first light. It was a routine, now, to anticipate arrivals. Each case reminded them that even though the Night King was gone, the realm's scars ran deep. Yet each success also reminded them that hope was not lost. Avarix soared overhead, letting out a soft cry that echoed across the awakening forest. Nailia smiled up at him, a surge of gratitude filling her chest. Though the forging had been born of desperation, it had given birth to more than just a weapon. It had sparked a renewal of purpose, forging new bonds between the forest and men. It had shown that even in the face of impossible darkness, life could triumph. Standing there, she recalled the hush of that ancient grove, the swirl of green vapor as bones of bark took shape, the trembling sense of wonder when the newborn dragon opened his glowing eyes. She remembered the night sky above the wall, the swirling clash of emerald flame and icy breath, the Night King tumbling into oblivion. And now this quiet dawn, full of possibility. She closed her eyes, inhaling the crisp air. Whatever hidden threats remained, she would stand resolute with her people and with her dragon to defend the living world. That was the vow she had made the day they poured shimmering liquid into the earth, the day they risked all to create a being immune to the Night King's grasp. A vow to protect life, to shield the forest, and to never again let the chill of endless night snuff out the world's warmth. She carried that vow in her heart, a steady flame that glowed like emerald within, guiding her steps forward into the unknown. Word spread gradually of the outpost in the northern forest, a secluded place where the children of the forest and men of the Night's Watch worked together to heal those suffering from lingering ice in their veins. Some travelers dismissed it as rumor, but for those who had nowhere else to turn, the promise of a possible cure was enough to risk the journey. Over time, a small, intermittent stream of the afflicted began arriving, guided by hushed advice from local villagers or by the rare official who knew the route. They came exhausted, often in dire condition, bearing frostbitten patches that pulsed with otherworldly chill. Many were saved. Some were not. Always, the forest and its guardians offered what help they could, forging a fragile but meaningful bond with the realm of men. Nailia found a new rhythm to her days. She often woke at first light, stepping outside the circular enclosure that formed the heart of the outpost. The huts, woven partly from living branches, took on an ethereal glimmer in the dawn. Smoke curled from a central hearth. Men in black cloaks, Brandel's watchers, rose to relieve each other's shifts, stifling yawns, while Farron tended to any newly arrived sufferers who might have limped into camp during the night. Celeria or another child of the forest would assess these arrivals, deciding whether they could be saved with an herbal remedy and gentle wards, or if a journey deeper into the forest to the healing glade was necessary. Averix would glide down from his roost in the pines, letting out a low trill that rattled leaves. His presence alone instilled calm in those who recognized him from the war's final battle or had heard tales of the Green Dragon's incorruptible fire. Some still cowered, hearts pounding, memories of dragonfire from old legends stirring fear. But Avrix's docile manner, the swirling leaf pattern on his scales, and the soft glow in his ember-colored eyes were so unlike the stark menace of a Valyrian beast. He was an integral part of the outpost's identity, a living symbol that the forest's magic did not necessarily herald doom. Yet no measure of reassurance could erase the memories of the long night. Men spoke of the White Walkers in hushed tones, reluctant to conjure old horrors by name. Many recalled that just because the Night King was gone did not mean all traces of his abominations had vanished. The outpost's very existence confirmed that. Some half-turned had endured, battered by fragmentary curses. It was not a stretch to imagine that some White Walker, or a shard of that icy intelligence, might yet roam. Nailia could not forget the fleeting glimpses she kept catching on the edges of her vision. More than once, when she ventured outside the outpost's boundaries to gather herbs or fetch water from the creek, she sensed the chill of unnatural eyes upon her. In the corner of her gaze, she would see a tall, silent figure that vanished before she could whirl around and confront it. No one else had glimpsed it. Not even Rill with his sharp senses. She began to wonder if it was only in her mind. Yet every time it happened, the air itself felt bruised by the echo of some cold presence. One morning, while kneeling near the creek's bank to wash a mortar and pestle used for herbs, she caught a reflection on the water's surface, pale limbs, a shape with spindly proportions. Gasping, she spun around. The shape was gone, the underbrush quivering only with the breeze. Heart-pounding, she pressed a hand to her chest, urging herself to remain calm. She had repeated this scene so many times, confronting emptiness. But the sense of an observer was too strong to dismiss. It felt as if a single White Walker, perhaps one with a will of its own, had survived, following her as though curious or cautious, neither attacking nor retreating fully. She told Rill of her suspicions yet again. He listened gravely, but their search of the perimeter revealed no footprints, no shards of ice left behind. 2 days later, under a sky thick with gray clouds, a pair of travelers stumbled into the outpost. One was tall and wiry, an older woman with scars on her cheeks. The other a younger man with a battered shield strapped to his back. The watchers at the gate, Hob and Tormin, beckoned them in, asking the usual questions. Who were they? Were they in search of healing? The woman bristled at first, protective of her companion. She insisted they were scouts from a northern holdfast, but she had come across a rumor that the man's wound might be turning cold. Nailia and Farron approached, calmly requesting to see the wound. The younger man refused at first, teeth chattering, though it was not that cold a day. Beads of sweat stood on his brow. Eventually, with coaxing, he peeled back layers of rough-spun cloth to show an area near his ribcage shot through with ugly white lines, looking almost like cracks in ice. His breath caught as Nailia drew close, for she radiated the faint warmth of the forest's wards. A smell of decay drifted from the wound. The woman said, voice taut, that a white had grazed him in the final battle near the wall. It hadn't seemed serious, but as months passed, something had festered beneath the scar. Nailia pressed gentle fingertips to the man's chest, closing her eyes. She sensed the same partial corruption they had encountered in others. If left untended, He might end up like Farron had been, or die in agony. She asked carefully how far they had traveled. The older woman named a mountain hold nearly 2 weeks away, insisting they had come with urgency the moment the creeping cold became undeniable. Nailia pitied them. So many others might still be out there, in denial or hiding their affliction from neighbors who would brand them cursed. She thought again that the outpost was only a single point of light in a vast realm. She directed the young man to rest in a hut. They placed him under thick blankets near a brazier. Celeria prepared a preliminary mixture of wild ginger, feverfew, and rowan bark that could slow the advance of ice. Later, they would attempt the deeper healing spells if the man's body was strong enough. The older woman hovered, anxious. Nailia told her gently that they would do everything they could, but the success rate was not guaranteed. While Celeria tended him, Nailia guided the woman outside, offering her a seat on a stump by the hearth. Steam rose from a kettle of warming broth. The watchers milled about, checking the perimeter. Farron was making a final inspection of some freshly woven walls to keep out the biting wind that might arrive with the next storm. The woman's face was weary, etched by hardships. She thanked Nailia quietly, eyes betraying equal parts wariness and hope. Then, with a flicker of hesitation, the woman confided something that froze Nailia's pulse. On the road south, she and her wounded companion had passed through deserted hamlets. Nothing too unusual in that part of the north. Plenty of small settlements had been abandoned during the long night, but she insisted these hamlets looked freshly deserted, as if the folk had vanished abruptly. One cottage had all its doors ajar, half-eaten meals on the table, no sign of struggle but footprints in the frosted mud leading away. Another had no footprints at all, just empty huts. The silence had unnerved her. She wondered if whites might have come for them, but found no bodies, no shards of ice. Everything just gone. Her voice trembled. She feared something else was taking people, something more cunning than the mindless dead. Nailia's heart sank. The White Walkers in their prime had forcibly turned entire villages into whites or into new recruits. If even one lingered in the far wilderness, it might be abducting small clusters of people to transform them into half-turned thralls. Or it might be scaring them off. The possibilities churned in her mind. She took a deep breath, urging calm. She thanked the woman for sharing the warning and promised to pass it along to the others. That day, after conferring with Celeria, Farron, and the Watchers, Nailia decided to dispatch a messenger to the Night's Watch again, requesting an investigation into these vanishings. If anything threatened to create a new pocket of undead or half-turned in the region, the Watchers needed to know. So the days continued, each one bringing a mixture of small triumphs, like a sufferer healed and freed of the creeping frost, and deep anxieties as unexplainable events multiplied. More stories trickled in of outlying homesteads that had gone quiet. Some said they saw pale figures in the forest at twilight. Some insisted they heard the echo of an eerie horn deep in the woods. A handful of half-turned insisted they had been snatched from their beds by a tall, silent shape but escaped its clutches. Many details contradicted each other, but one common thread remained, an unspoken fear that the White Walkers were not entirely gone. Nailia wrestled with whether to share these rumors widely. She worried that if men began to believe the White Walkers had truly returned, panic would spark an exodus. Or worse, unscrupulous lords might blame the children for harboring dark secrets in the forest. But ignoring the signs could be catastrophic. She spoke with Ahara, who traveled from the deeper glades to the outpost for a few days. They agreed to quietly coordinate with the Night's Watch. Let men in black investigate the scattered settlements, question survivors, piece together what was happening. Meanwhile, the children would search the forest's deeper recesses for any genuine sign of a rogue White Walker. If they found it, they would do what must be done. Ahara took this plan back to the forest, promising to muster scouts who could roam north of the outpost. Nailia remained behind to keep the sanctuary running. At night, she found it hard to sleep. She would stare into the dying embers of the hearth, replaying the final battle in her mind. The swirling clash of emerald and icy flame, the Night King tumbling into oblivion. She recalled the sense of finality in that moment. How could any White Walker remain after that? The wards in Avrix's breath had shattered the central power animating them all. Yet she realized that an old rumor insisted not all White Walkers served a single master. The Night King had been the mightiest, forging them into an army, but perhaps a few existed beyond his immediate brood, lurking in far corners of the polar wastes. Now one might have drifted south, curious or vengeful. If so, it had cunning enough not to engage Avirix directly. Instead, it stole away a handful of humans at a time, perhaps trying to rebuild something. The thought tormented Nailia. Each day, she watched the horizon, scanning for any sign of a large movement or force. Only once did she catch a fleeting column of pale mist in the distance, near twilight, but it vanished in the gloom. She felt certain that whoever or whatever was out there preferred stealth. As the outpost settled into uneasy vigilance, another challenge arose from a different quarter. A small group of armed men arrived one morning, wearing the colors of a lesser northern house that had once sworn fealty to the Boltons. Their leader, a narrow-faced knight with a clipped mustache, introduced himself as Ser Jorand Moore. His band, maybe a dozen men, marched into the clearing unannounced. Instantly, watchers from the Night's Watch confronted them, demanding they state their purpose. Ser Jorand insisted in stiff tones that he came in official capacity, seeking audience with the children of the forest on behalf of his lord. Nailia and Farron emerged from one of the huts, uneasy at the presence of armed men. Rill joined them, a hand on his bow. The watchers, though outnumbered, looked grimly ready to defend the outpost. Avirix, sensing tension, alighted from a perch in a nearby pine, gliding into view and landing with a heavy thud that caused the intruders to flinch. The band's horses stamped and snorted, eyes rolling at the sight of the dragon. Ser Jorand stared at Avirix with a mix of awe and alarm. Then he drew a breath and faced Nailia. "We mean no harm. We only wish to speak with whoever leads this place. My lord heard of your healing talents. He sends an offer of alliance." Nailia felt a ripple of dread, recalling the fear that lords might see the forest's healing or forging magic as a resource to exploit. She gave a measured nod. "We're listening, but you should know we do not strike bargains lightly." Ser Jorand dismounted, presumably to present himself as less threatening. But he kept a hand near the hilt of his sword, as though reluctant to trust the watchers, the dragon, or the children. "My lord's name is Dalton Moore. He rules a modest domain in the eastern hills. His youngest son suffers from a lingering chill that no maester can dispel. The lad was touched by white ice during the war. My lord begs for your assistance, and in return he offers men-at-arms, supplies, coin, whatever you require. Perhaps the outpost could expand. My lord believes that, together, we might create something larger, a more formal institution to treat the half-turned, maybe beyond just the forest's boundary." Nailia saw the glint in the knight's eyes. She sensed ambition behind the words. Rill, at her side, spoke quietly. "We have no interest in coin or expansions. Our ways are not for sale." Farron, mindful of the watchers eyeing the knights, managed a polite tone. "If the boy is truly afflicted, you're welcome to bring him here for help. We do not demand payment, but we also do not promise we can save every case. The outpost is what it is, a sanctuary, not an enterprise." Ser Jorand's mustache twitched. "That is appreciated, of course. But my lord wonders if a deeper partnership might be made. He could build a stronger fortification here, or in some clearing you designate, with real walls and staff enough to handle many more patients. You would oversee the healing, while he and his men handle security, ensuring no brigands or undesirables tarnish this cause. In time, maybe the entire region could become a recognized seat of knowledge regarding the White Walker's lingering curses. Surely that would benefit everyone." Nailia shared a quick look with Rill. The proposal was not entirely malicious. On paper, it might seem logical, a better guarded stronghold, resources, expansions. Yet it reeked of the very meddling they had hoped to avoid. If a lord poured men and money into the outpost, he would feel entitled to shape its mission or to demand the children share more secrets. The sanctuary would become a pawn in the realm's politics. She shook her head, trying to keep her voice civil. "We are grateful for the offer, but we must decline. The outpost is sufficient to meet our current capacity. We prefer to keep the forest unspoiled by stone fortifications. We do not want large contingents of armed men setting up permanent residence near our glades." Ser Jorand's face tightened. "My lord anticipated you might be reluctant, but I urge you to reconsider. This region is still vulnerable to bandit raids, wildlings, or worse. Imagine losing this place to a single organized assault. The boy's father only wants to protect your good work. "We are not helpless," Nailia answered calmly, flicking her gaze to Avarix, who rumbled softly. "And the watchers here are more than capable of handling trouble." The knight's eyes darted to the dragon. For a moment, a flicker of fear or resentment crossed his features. Nailia wondered if, deep down, he disliked relying on a creature beyond mortal control. Still, he forced a tight smile. "Very well. I have done my duty in relaying my lord's request. May we at least rest here before returning home? And may we inform Lord Dalton whether you would accept his son as a patient?" Farron nodded cautiously. "Any afflicted is welcome so long as they abide by our rules and do not cause strife. Your men can rest in that clearing over there. Our watchers will keep an eye. No weapons are to be raised against us or you'll be asked to leave." Ser Jorund huffed but complied. His band disarmed themselves to appear less threatening than pitched tents near the outpost's perimeter. Tormin and Hob made sure to patrol frequently. Rill tested the tension in his bow, always ready if something turned sour. Throughout the day, the knights lingered, some drifting around to watch the half-turned patients with uneasy fascination. A few tried to question Celeria or other children about the nature of healing. They received polite but brief answers. By evening, tensions calmed slightly, though the atmosphere remained wary. The knights prepared a small fire, cooking game they had hunted en route. Nailia found Ser Jorund near the edge of the camp, staring out at the ancient pines. She approached, offering a neutral nod. He shifted, clearly uncertain how to address her. Finally, he asked, "Do you not desire any help from men at all, aside from these watchers?" Nailia studied his face in the torchlight. "We accepted the watchers because we trust the Night's Watch to remain neutral, unattached to petty conflicts. They have no ambition to rule or expand. That's the difference. We appreciate that your lord might truly care about his son. If he wishes to bring him here, we will help if we can. But forging a deeper alliance would demand more trust than either side seems ready to give." He lowered his gaze, exhaling. "You're right. The truth is, many of us have lost so much. My lord's house was battered during the war, overshadowed by larger powers. He sees in this outpost a chance to restore our name. Healing the half-turned would be a noble cause, but also a way to gain influence. I suppose I cannot blame him. Still, it's not my place to question. I serve." Nailia nodded gently. "We each have our roles. I hope your lord will find another path. One that doesn't demand binding the forest to his will." She paused, glancing at the flicker of distant shadows. Sometimes the greatest help is to let a seed grow undisturbed, rather than building a castle around it. Ser Jorund looked at her curiously, then offered a faint, weary smile. "Perhaps. I pray you succeed in your mission. This chill has taken too many good folk." That night, the knights departed quietly, promising to send word if Lord Dalton decided to bring his son. Some watchers half expected them to try something underhanded before leaving. But they packed their tents with no incident and faded into the darkness. Once they were gone, Nailia felt relief, but also a pang of concern. It would not be the last time an ambitious house tested the boundaries of the outpost. For each that approached with courtesy, how many might arrive demanding compliance? In the days that followed, Ihara's scouts brought worrisome news. They had combed the northern reaches of the forest, near old trails leading to the Frostfangs. They discovered 2 small villages that had been ransacked, but not by whites. No bodies. Doors left open. A few lumps of melted ice near thresholds, which might imply a White Walker's presence. The scouts found no survivors. The unnerving pattern was the same. Entire communities had vanished overnight, leaving behind half-finished tasks and footprints in the snow leading nowhere conclusive. Ihara suspected that a solitary White Walker, or perhaps 2, were abducting people to mold them into a small coterie of thralls. That would explain the trickle of half-turned turning up at the outpost. Some escaped. Many, presumably, did not. Nailia's blood chilled at the possibility. A cunning White Walker might be capturing entire families, forcibly initiating them into that cursed state, then discarding those whose transformations failed. She remembered the ephemeral glimpses of a tall shape lurking in the forest. If such a being existed, why had it not amassed a vast army? Perhaps it simply lacked the raw magical power once wielded by the Night King. It might be trying to recreate the method, stumbling in a half-failed attempt to turn men. That explained why so many ended up half-turned or afflicted with lesser forms of frost. The White Walker's attempts were incomplete or flawed. Rumors abounded that the hush of a horn sometimes sounded at night from deeper in the woods, summoning poor souls away. Some watchers dismissed it as folk superstition. But the pattern was undeniable. The outpost's new role, healing those who managed to escape, took on even greater urgency. After much discussion, Ihara and the other elders decided a direct confrontation was needed. If a White Walker truly haunted the forest, abducting entire hamlets, the children had to deal with it before the plague of half-turns spread. But it had to be done carefully. If they rushed in unprepared, the White Walker might slip away to continue its predations. Or it might retaliate by slaughtering or turning its captives. They needed a plan that would draw it out or track it without giving it time to vanish. Meanwhile, the outpost would remain vigilant, continuing the healing. Nailia volunteered to help lead a scouting mission. She was the one who sensed the presence most keenly. She had glimpsed it near Winterfell, then in the forest. Perhaps she shared some link with it, however unsettling, that might let her detect its next move. Rill joined her readily along with 2 other children, Kessa and Darren, who were skilled in stealth. Avarix would accompany them, though the challenge was that a dragon's presence was not exactly subtle. They devised a plan where the 4 children would scout on foot, following leads from Ihara's scouts, while Avarix circled at a distance, prepared to strike if needed. The day they set out, a strange hush blanketed the forest. Clouds covered the sun, leaving the undergrowth in diffuse gray light. They moved swiftly but quietly, using paths known only to the children, paying close attention to every whisper of wind. They found the first deserted hamlet by late afternoon, a cluster of wooden huts, roofs half collapsed, the ground outside pitted with footprints that had frozen, melted, and refrozen. No sign of a fight. Just eerie emptiness. Inside one hut, a child's toy lay abandoned on a table, dust gathering. The place felt like a tomb. Darren's face was grim as he knelt to examine the footprints. They left in haste, he murmured. Some were barefoot, some had shoes. All heading deeper into the forest, but scattered. No sign of whites or bodies. Must have been days or weeks ago. Nailia stood in the threshold, scanning the shadows. I sense an echo of cold here, she said softly. Not enough to form frost, but enough to prickle my skin. Like the afterimage of White Walker magic. Rill moved to the back of the hut, discovering a wall scrawled with frantic letters in the common tongue, he calls in the night. That was all. It had been etched with charcoal, the lines haphazard. A chill gripped them all. The occupant must have tried to warn any who came after. Rill's eyes met Nailia's. A single White Walker, perhaps projecting a compulsion? Leading them away? She shuddered. So it seems. She looked back at Kessa and Darren. Let's follow the tracks. But carefully. Outside, they gave a low whistle to summon Avarix, who soared overhead. The great dragon swooped across the hamlet's clearing, scanning from above. The children formed a tight group and ventured into the deeper woods. The footprints soon became difficult to follow, scattered around rocky outcrops and marshy ground. After an hour, twilight began to gather, making the trail even more challenging. Yet the faint tingle in Nailia's senses told her they were heading in the right direction. She pressed on, ignoring the gnawing anxiety in her gut. They made camp that night in a sheltered hollow between moss-draped boulders. Avarix perched on a rocky ledge above them, eyes gleaming in the dimness. Kessa and Darren quietly foraged for mushrooms and edible roots while Rill kept watch. Nailia sat near a small, shielded fire, letting the forest's hush envelop her. Yet again, she thought she saw that flicker of a tall figure at the edge of her vision. She turned, heart pounding, but the shape dissolved into the swirl of shadows. She clenched her fists. Show yourself, she whispered under her breath, but no one answered. In the dead of night, they heard a strange sound echo through the trees. A low, mournful note that might have been a horn. It was faint, carried by the wind. The 4 children awoke, huddling near the smoldering embers of their fire. Avarix let out a low rumble, as though unsettled. Nailia's pulse hammered. She knew this had to be the call that lured unsuspecting villagers. But from where? They decided to wait until dawn. Traveling in darkness would be too risky. Still, none of them returned to restful sleep. When first light crept through the canopy, they gathered their gear and set off in the direction from which the horn had sounded. The trail wound through tangled thickets, crossing half-frozen streams. Occasionally they spotted footprints or torn bits of fabric snagged on branches. Some footprints were days old, but a few seemed fresher, as though a new group of wanderers had passed recently. The oppressive hush in the air deepened, and the temperature dropped strangely, as if they had stepped into an earlier season. Thin sheets of ice-coated puddles. They found the first real sign of life or half-life midday, when Kessa quietly waved for them to take cover behind a fallen log. Peering out, Nailia saw a small clearing in which a group of 5 or 6 humans stood motionless, staring blankly forward. Their clothes were ragged, eyes distant. Frost clung to their hair, leaving it brittle. They did not speak or react. It was as if they were in a trance. Darren whispered in the old tongue. Half-turned. Nailia studied their posture, the vacant expressions. She felt a wave of pity. These poor souls had been drawn here by the horn's call. Some might have been forced or coerced. Now they stood in a bizarre stasis. She wanted to help them. Yet something in the center of the clearing caught her eye. A faint swirl of icy air, drifting in the shape of runes that she did not recognize. It reminded her of the old patterns used by the White Walkers to mark their territory, though it was half-formed. She wondered if the White Walker was trying to recreate a ritual that once required the Night King's power. Rill put a hand on her arm, motioning for caution. But Nailia gritted her teeth. They had to do something. She signaled to Kessa and Darren, instructing them to circle around. Rill and Nailia would approach from the front, and Averix would remain overhead if the White Walker revealed itself. She prayed they were not walking into a trap. With arrow knocked, Rill crept from behind the log, Nailia at his side. She wore a simple dagger of dragonglass, but hoped not to fight unless forced. The group of half-turned did not stir. Their shallow breaths fogged the cold air. An unsettling hush pressed in. Nailia took a careful step forward. "Can you hear me?" she asked, voice low. "We're friends. We can help." No response. Then, with shocking abruptness, one of the half-turned twitched, turning its head to face her. The expression was empty, yet tears trembled in the man's eyes as though some part of him remained aware. A faint crackle of ice formed around his boots. Nailia swallowed a surge of sorrow. She had to break them free of this enthrallment. She raised her hand, focusing on the forest's warmth that the children used in healing. She let a flicker of that gentle greenish glow play across her fingertips, aiming it toward the group as a silent offering of release. One of them, the only woman in the group, took a step forward, arms trembling. A swirl of frost parted around her ankles as though she might break free. Then a sharp gust of wind cut through the clearing, colder than winter itself. Nailia's breath caught. She knew the chill. A figure emerged from between 2 gnarled pines, tall and gaunt, clad in what looked like tattered furs layered with ice. Its face was pale to the point of translucence, with hollow cheeks and eyes that glowed faintly blue. Unlike the Night King's regal bearing, this one looked more desperate, half-feral, as though incomplete. The lines on its skin suggested cracks that could be remnants of its own half-finished creation. Yet power radiated off it enough to make the temperature plummet. A faint ring of frost spread along the ground as it advanced. Nailia and Rill froze, weapons ready. She felt her mouth go dry. So it was true, a surviving White Walker, or some variant, stumbling through a partial mastery of that hateful magic. For a heartbeat, it simply gazed at them in eerie silence. Then it lifted one spindly arm. A blast of icy wind shot toward them, swirling with shards of frost. Rill dove aside, rolling behind a stump. Nailia raised her arm, the wards in her own body flaring. A greenish shimmer flickered across her hand, deflecting part of the cold. But it still stung, freezing the edges of her cloak. She hissed in pain, staggering back. In that moment, the group of half-turned jerked as if yanked by invisible strings. Some advanced toward Nailia with jerky steps, arms outstretched. She recognized the compulsion controlling them, reminiscent of how the White Walkers manipulated whites. But these were living thralls, tethered to the White Walkers' will by the incomplete turning. She had no desire to harm them. If she fought, she might kill innocents. Heart-pounding, she tried to project warmth from her center, hoping to disrupt the White Walker's hold. She let out a trembling breath, focusing on the lessons Ahara had taught her for healing the half-turned, the slow, deliberate extension of forest energy. Meanwhile, Rill snapped off a dragonglass arrow from behind the stump, aiming at the White Walker's torso. The arrow whistled through the clearing and glanced off a swirl of frigid air that encased the walker in a rudimentary shield of hoarfrost. The arrow chipped away a fragment of ice but failed to strike flesh. The walker turned its head, regarding Rill with a cold, silent malice. Then it raised its hand again, sending a fresh gust of cold that raked across the stump. Rill dove to the ground, nearly pinned by clinging frost. His next arrow clattered away unused. Nailia's attempt at projecting warmth reached the thralls. The woman who had stepped forward earlier gasped, blinking. A flicker of life returned to her eyes. But the others advanced relentlessly, arms stiff. She couldn't free them all at once. The White Walker seemed to sense her effort. It let out a sound between a hiss and a moan, then thrust an arm outward, sending the thralls into a ragged charge. Nailia had no choice but to retreat or risk being overwhelmed. Above, a thunderous roar broke the hush. Avirix descended, wings whipping the air. The White Walker whirled to face the dragon. Perhaps it recognized the living flame that had slain the Night King. A glint of fear or rage flickered in its eyes. Avirix exhaled a blast of emerald fire that lanced across the clearing, aimed to avoid the thralls. The White Walker raised both arms, channeling an intense wave of cold, meeting the green flame in midair. The two powers clashed in a swirl of steam and sparks. The half-turned thralls stumbled, thrown off balance by the sudden vortex of heat and cold. Nailia took advantage, seizing the arms of the nearest thrall, coaxing a flicker of forest warmth into him. He gasped, half-collapsing as the White Walker's grip on his mind wavered. Rill emerged from behind the stump, loosing another arrow. This time, it struck the walker's flank where the swirling shield had thinned. The creature shrieked, staggering a step. A chunk of ice broke away from its side. Dark, half-frozen fluid seeped from the wound, though it quickly crystallized. The White Walker glared at Rill with seething hatred, lips curling over teeth that looked as sharp as splinters of ice. Before it could retaliate, a second volley of green flame from Avirix hammered it. The creature jerked, struggling to maintain its shield, but cracks spread along its body, reminiscent of fracturing glass. Its eyes flared bright blue, as though drawing on every shred of cold in the clearing. The thralls, now largely freed from direct compulsion, staggered about in confusion. Kessa and Darren, who had circled behind the clearing, raced out from the tree-lean to drag them away. Meanwhile, Nailia mustered her remaining energy. She pressed forward, dagger of dragon glass in hand. If the White Walker faltered, this might be their chance to finish it. The memory of how the Night King had fallen to unstoppable forest flame emboldened her. She signaled Rill, who angled to get a clear shot. Avirix snarled overhead, flames building for another strike. But the creature was not done. With a hiss that rattled the branches, it unleashed a focused cone of frost, narrower yet more potent than before, aimed directly at the dragon. Avirix roared, wards flaring. Steam erupted where the ice struck the emerald aura. The wards held, but the assault forced Avirix to swerve, cutting off the next blast of flame. The White Walker seized that moment to hurl itself sideways, moving with unnerving agility. It seemed to half-melt into the swirling frost, slipping through the undergrowth on the far side of the clearing. Rill loosed an arrow, but the shot was blocked by a swirl of ice-laden branches. Within moments, the White Walker vanished among the trees, leaving only a faint trail of freezing mist. Nailia cursed under her breath, sprinting to the edge of the clearing. But the forest stretched on, cold and silent, the culprit gone. She heard Kessa calling, they fled. Another arrow soared after the ghostly silhouette, but it shattered against a trunk. Nailia slowed, frustration gnawing at her. She felt no sense of victory. They had wounded it but not destroyed it. Who knew how swiftly it might heal or vanish beyond their reach? Returning to the clearing, she found Kessa and Darren gently tending the thralls. Some had collapsed to the ground moaning. A few, eyes vacant, wandered in disoriented circles. The woman Nailia had partially freed clutched her arms as though trying to preserve the fleeting warmth. Rill stood guard, scanning the tree-lean with arrow nocked. Avirix landed in the center, smoke curling from his nostrils, tail lashing in agitation. Nailia sank to one knee, checking on the thrall's condition. Their skin was clammy, some bearing the telltale cracks of the half-turned. She exchanged a worried look with Kessa. If they were not treated soon, some might perish or revert to the White Walker's influence. A healing ritual like the ones performed at the outpost could help, but they would need time and a safe place. The clearing was hardly that. They decided to bring the captives back toward the outpost at once. With no sign of the White Walker returning, they had to seize the chance. Carefully, the children and the freed humans formed a ragged group. A few thralls could barely walk, requiring support. One or two were strong enough to stumble along on their own, ice-haunted but clearing of frost. Kessa and Darren led the way, forging a path through the undergrowth. Rill and Nailia guarded the rear, weapons drawn. Avirix soared overhead, watchful. It was slow, grueling travel. More than once, the half-turned coughed up flecks of ice or collapsed with spasms of pain. Nailia paused to whisper the gentle forest chant, hoping to keep them stable until they reached the outpost. Night fell before they had made half the distance. They camped in a dense copse of evergreens, lighting a single fire for warmth and stationing vigilant watches. The thralls moaned in their sleep, nightmares no doubt plaguing them. Nailia again thought she heard the faint horn echo in the distance, but Rill insisted it was only the wind. She could not decide if that was comforting or more terrifying. By mid-afternoon the following day, they emerged near the outpost's boundary. Guards from the Night's Watch hurried out to help carry the weakened thralls inside. Farron, upon seeing them, recognized the signs of incomplete turning. He and Celeria immediately began preparing herbs and wards, setting aside space in one of the huts. Some watchers gave the thralls uneasy looks, though by now they were accustomed to such sights. Still, the presence of so many at once raised concern. If the White Walkers' experiments escalated, more would come, possibly in far worse condition. While the thralls received initial care, Nailia and Rill debriefed the watchers, then wrote a swift dispatch for Brandel, urging him to gather rangers and comb the region north of the outpost. They needed more eyes, more swords. The watchers quickly set about sending a rider. Nailia could only hope the Night's Watch could help corner this rogue walker. Waiting idly felt intolerable, yet without more numbers or a cunning strategy, chasing the creature again might yield the same result. Days passed in tension. The thralls slowly improved under the outpost's care, though two did not survive the initial shock of their injuries. The rest faced a difficult road of partial healing. The forest's magic and wards subdued the frost, but some scarring remained, and their minds carried the trauma of being puppet. The woman who had first responded to Nailia's call recovered enough to speak. Her name was Maven. She whispered that the walker had come in the night, blasting through the flimsy walls of her hamlet, calling them in a voice like wind over ice. She remembered half following, half being dragged into the woods. Then nothing. Nailia tried to console her, but she could offer little beyond gentle assurances that the worst was over. A wave of relief came when Brandel himself arrived at the outpost, leading 10 rangers. They bore the black cloaks of the watch but carried heavier gear than usual. Some Nailia recognized from the final battle at the wall. Others were new faces, hardened by the north. Brandel greeted her with a solemn nod, eyeing the thralls in the huts. "We've been hearing troubling reports. Your message confirms them. Let's not wait for the worst. We'll hunt that abomination, track it down properly." He conferred with the children, planning a systematic sweep of the forest. Ehara, who had arrived earlier for council, agreed to send more scouts from the deep glades. The plan was that watchers and children would form multiple teams, combing the region in a coordinated pattern to push the White Walker into a corner or flush it into the open where Avarix could strike. It would require patience and caution, especially with the outpost needing at least a skeleton crew to continue healing the half-turned. But time was running out. Another village might vanish if they delayed. Nailia insisted on joining the main strike team. She had confronted the creature already, and her wards were strong enough to withstand its blasts. Rill volunteered as well, as did Kessa and Darren. Avarix would remain overhead, swift to respond to any horn blasts or sightings. Meanwhile, Celeria stayed at the outpost to aid the afflicted. Farron also remained, managing day-to-day tasks. Brandel split his rangers into 2 squads. One would circle from the east, the other from the west, meeting at a designated clearing near the swamps. He hoped that if the walker tried to slip away, it would run into one of the squads. Meanwhile, the children's scouts formed a silent net further south to ensure the walker could not double back toward the outpost. The day they set out, clouds boiled overhead, threatening a storm. Nailia's breath misted in the chilled air, though it was late in the season for such cold. She suspected the walker's presence was warping the weather. They moved quickly, Brandel's rangers armed with torches, dragonglass blades, and a few swords of castle-forged steel. The group Nailia led included 5 rangers, Rill, Kessa, Darren, and herself. She sent silent prayers to the forest, hoping the plan would not end in tragedy. The search began in a quiet, methodical fashion, combing each glade, scanning every old ruin. They found more signs of deserted dwellings, footprints, scraps of frost-laden cloth. It was disheartening but also useful in narrowing the probable direction. By the second day, an ominous tension crackled in the air. That evening, as they made camp under a stand of old firs, the watchers shuddered at the uncanny hush that settled over the forest. No birds sang, no animals scurried. The wind occasionally carried faint, moaning echoes as if a call bounced among the distant hills. Everyone suspected the walker was near. That night, Nailia jerked awake to the sensation of frosty air curling around her limbs. She sat up, heart-pounding. The campsite was dark, illuminated only by moonlight. A hush enveloped the sleeping forms of rangers and children. A low whine from one of the horses indicated it sensed something. Nailia scanned the shadows, adrenaline surging. She noticed a swirl of mist creeping between the trees. Then, faintly, she glimpsed that tall silhouette. It stood maybe 20 paces away, half concealed behind a trunk. Its eyes glimmered with that pale blue. It was watching her, not attacking. Silent. She fumbled for her dragonglass dagger, unsure whether to rouse the entire camp or risk scaring the creature off. Her mind raced. If it lingered, perhaps she could hold it at bay until the others awakened. But the moment she shifted her weight, the White Walker turned and vanished into the swirling mist. She cursed quietly, rising to chase, but by the time she reached the tree, the presence was gone. The forest lay still again. When Rill jerked awake at her quiet call, the only sign anything had been there was a lingering cold in the air. In the morning, she told Brandel and the others what had happened. Some rangers cursed, frustrated they had not kept watch more diligently. But Nailia realized the walker had made no move to kill them or freeze them in their sleep. Why? It could have unleashed a barrage of ice to devastating effect, yet it only lingered, observing. She remembered the partial cracks in its flesh, the sense of desperation. A troubling thought arose, perhaps it recognized that the forging wards that had destroyed the Night King could also destroy it. Was it hesitant to fight them directly? Was it seeking a different path or a new method to regain strength? They continued the search. By midday, the tension ratcheted higher. Brandel's eastern squad had found fresh footprints suggesting a group of missing villagers or thralls was being herded. The watchers discovered half-constructed ice pillars as if the walker was building a small shrine in the depths of the woods. When they approached, they found broken lumps of ice as though the creature had realized it was discovered and dismantled its work. Rill speculated it might be trying to mimic some aspect of the Night King's fortress, but failing. Late that afternoon, one of Brandel's rangers sprinted into camp, panting. He had come from the western squad, shouting that they had found something, signs of a large group of thralls. The White Walker was pushing them west, evidently spooked by the net of watchers. The western squad had them cornered near a rocky gorge. But they needed reinforcements to handle so many living thralls without a bloodbath. Brandel gathered all who could move quickly. Nailia and her companions followed, pushing themselves through the forest at a near run, guided by the ranger. They arrived at the gorge near twilight. Stark stone walls rose on either side, forming a narrow pass. Pine trees clung to the edges of the cliffs. The western squad was assembled behind boulders, weapons ready, as a large mass of enthralled humans stood at the far end, near the mouth of a cavern. Torchlight flickered on the thralls' pallid faces. More than a dozen, maybe close to 20, forming a ragged line. The White Walker was visible at the back, half hidden by swirling frost. Something glistened behind it in the darkness of the cavern as if it were hoarding lumps of ice or building some twisted altar. The thralls swayed like puppets, no sign of free will in their movements. A murmured conference followed. Brandel wanted to press the advantage. If they could break the walker's hold, the thralls might scatter or come to their senses, letting the watchers corner the creature. But how to do so without a massacre? Every second wasted was a chance the walker might slip deeper into the cavern. Nailia resolved to try once more with the forest's warmth, but she would need to get close. She turned to see if there was any vantage for Avarix to strike from above. But the gorge's walls were narrow, offering limited flight paths. Summoning the dragon might risk injuring the thralls if his flame was not carefully directed. In the end, they adopted a two-pronged approach. Brandel and most watchers would approach from one side of the gorge, brandishing torches, hopefully drawing the White Walker's attention. Meanwhile, Nailia, Rill, and a few rangers would sneak along a narrow ledge on the opposite side, attempting to circle behind the thralls. Once in position, Nailia would try to disrupt the walker's control by channeling the same healing energy she used on half-turned individuals on a larger scale. If it worked, the thralls might break free. Then Rill and the watchers could pick off the White Walker with dragonglass or call in Avarix for a final strike. They moved into position. Darkness gathered, stars emerging overhead. Torches flared at the main entrance of the gorge where Brandel's force stood. Nailia, Rill, and 3 rangers in black crawled along a precarious ledge halfway up the gorge wall, every step carefully planted to avoid dislodging stones. Nailia's heart pounded. A fall from here would be deadly. Below, she could see the thralls milling in confusion. The White Walker hissed, forming plumes of frost around itself. As Brandel advanced, the walker hurled shards of ice that hammered the boulders, forcing the watchers to duck. Finally, Nailia's group reached a vantage behind the thralls. She and Rill climbed down onto a small platform of rock near the cavern mouth. The watchers with them readied arrows. All around them, the air tasted like iron, thick with tension. The White Walker had not noticed them yet, fixated on the approaching torches. They had a moment of advantage. Nailia closed her eyes, inhaling. She steadied her mind, recalling the forest's hush, the glow that helped free Farron and so many others. She reached for that warmth, channeling it into the swirl of energy that existed in her chest, letting it build. Her breath hitched as she felt a resonance, the intangible link to the weirwoods, to the living land that had once created Avarix. She opened her eyes and extended both hands toward the thralls. Instead of focusing on a single person, she tried to spread that energy in a broad wave, a gentle pulse of warmth meant to rouse them. No incantation was necessary, the forest's magic flowed through raw intention as much as spoken word. A faint greenish shimmer formed around her outstretched palms, drifting downward like motes of light. The thralls twitched. Some moaned. Nailia gritted her teeth, forcing more warmth into the flow. She felt her own energy draining faster than when healing a single person. But bit by bit, the thralls stirred as though waking from a nightmare. They staggered, blinking. A man near the front dropped to his knees, coughing out flecks of ice. A young girl buried her face in her hands, sobbing. That was enough. The White Walker sensed its hold breaking. With a snarl, it spun, seeing Nailia perched behind the thralls. Its eyes narrowed in fury. It thrust a skeletal hand forward, preparing a blast of cold. But an arrow from Rill whistled through the gloom, striking the walker's shoulder. The impact staggered it, forcing the frost blast to veer sideways. A chunk of the cavern wall froze into jagged crystals. The watchers with Nailia took aim, unleashing their own arrows. Some missed or shattered on the swirling ice shield, but one found a gap, grazing the walker's flank. The creature howled in pain and rage. Below, Brandel's squad seized the moment, rushing forward with torches. Freed of the thralls, the watchers could target the walker without risking innocence. The enthralled humans stumbled away, pressing themselves against the gorge walls, trembling. The walker realized it was cornered. With another ear-splitting shriek, it drew upon the ice in the cavern behind it. A whirlwind of frigid air exploded outward, hurling watchers back, forming a partial barrier of jagged icicles. It lurched deeper into the cavern, limping from the arrow wounds. Nailia didn't want it escaping. Ignoring the spinning dizziness from her exertion, she nodded to Rill. They scrambled down a slope of rubble into the cavern mouth, half chasing the walker. Brandel and a few watchers followed, battered but determined. The interior of the cavern shimmered with weird ice formations, crude pillars glinting in torchlight. At the far end, a raised shelf of rock held a bizarre arrangement. Lumps of partially carved ice shaped into a twisted symbol, reminiscent of the Night King's old sigils. The White Walker stumbled there, arms trembling with effort. Blue light glowed around its hands, as if it were trying to tap into some deeper well of power. Rill drew back his bow for a final shot, but the walker whipped around, unleashing a torrent of ice shards that forced him to duck behind a stalagmite. Brandel and the watchers advanced along the sides, flanking. Nailia pressed forward from the center, brandishing her dagger. She could sense the walker was weakening. Its movements were jerky, the old cracks in its flesh bleeding trickles of dark fluid. But cornered animals were most dangerous. She hesitated. Should she call for Avarix to blast the cave? That might collapse the entire place or kill them all. The White Walker let out a ragged, hollow roar that seemed torn from its chest. It glared at Nailia with an expression that mingled hate and something else, desperation. In that instant, she almost felt pity. This being, a leftover from a dark age, was fighting for survival, lacking the raw might the Night King once commanded. It was trying to replicate old rituals, forging thralls to create an echo of that lost empire of ice. But it was doomed to fail, hounded by the forest's wards and a realm that would no longer bow to winter's terror. It must have sensed her moment of hesitation. With a last surge of will, it thrust both arms toward the twisted ice altar behind it. The pillars glowed, swirling with pale arcs of energy that flared bright as a dying star. The watchers shouted in alarm. Rill rose to shoot, but an avalanche of cold battered him. Nailia dropped to one knee, cloak whipping in the gust. She felt the forest wards inside her sizzle, reacting to a final, desperate wave of ice magic that threatened to freeze the entire cavern. Before the walker could unleash the blast, an ear-splitting roar echoed behind them. Avarix, having forced his way into the upper portion of the cavern or possibly broken through a side entrance, soared in with a swirl of emerald flame that lit the gloom like daylight. The flame lanced across the entire back wall, vaporizing the ice altar in an instant. Shards exploded outward in a burst of steam and fractured crystals. The White Walker shrieked, caught in the conflagration. Its cold aura battered at the dragon's flame, forming a swirling storm of steam, but the wards fueling Avarix's breath proved mightier. The swirl of emerald hammered the walker's body. With a final, ear-splitting wail, the creature's form began to crack, lines of bright ice fracturing it from within. It collapsed to its knees, arms raised as though in supplication. Then, with a flash of green light, it shattered into 1,000 shards of dark ice that quickly melted to an acrid vapor, leaving only a puddle of blackish liquid that sizzled on the cavern floor. In the sudden silence, Nailia slumped, breathing hard, the echo of that final shriek still ringing in her ears. A few watchers emerged from cover, wide-eyed. Steam rolled across the cavern, the shattered remains of the altar dripping from the walls. Rill coughed, lowering his bow, eyes on the place where the walker had stood. It was gone, wholly undone. Brandel let out a long breath, stepping forward to ensure no remnant survived. He kicked at the blackish puddle with the heel of his boot. It hissed, dissolving into nothing. The watchers exhaled in relief and uneasy awe. Averix folded his wings carefully, stepping gingerly among the rubble. Smoke curled from his nostrils as he peered down at the last traces of the White Walker. Then he turned to Nailia, letting out a soft rumble that vibrated through the cavern. She managed a wan smile, reaching up to pat his scaled flank. "We did it," she murmured, voice shaky with adrenaline. One more shadow of the long night gone. They emerged from the cavern to find the thralls in disarray, but no longer compelled. Some watchers were helping them, lighting more torches to guide them away from the cliff's edge. A few wept in confusion. One recognized a lost friend among the watchers, leading to a tearful reunion. The final outcome was better than they could have hoped. Minimal bloodshed, the White Walker destroyed. Nailia realized it might not be the last echo of that ancient evil, but at least this one would no longer prey upon innocents. In the days after, the watchers escorted the freed thralls back to the outpost. Many needed the forest's healing, though they seemed less afflicted than those the walker had fully enthralled for a long period. Nailia, Rill, and the others helped where they could, bandaging wounds, singing the quiet spells that eased frost from minds. Celeria and Farron worked tirelessly to rehabilitate them. Over time, some would return to their homes if they still stood. Others, traumatized and with no kin, stayed to find new purpose, or traveled to other corners of the realm. Brandel's men took stock of the situation, concluding that no other White Walker remnants lurked in the immediate forest. The Watchers would continue patrolling, in case other half-turned drifters showed up or more rumors of vanishings cropped up. For the moment, though, the worst threat had passed. Nailia and the children quietly celebrated the successful hunt, though it carried a bittersweet edge. Each time they destroyed a remnant of the White Walkers, they were reminded of how deeply that evil had scarred the land. News of the victory spread by word of mouth. Gradually, travelers stopped speaking of vanishings in the region. Rumors of a lurking walker subsided, replaced by stories that the outpost, alongside a dragon, had dealt the final blow. Some admired that feat, others found it unsettling that such power resided among the children. But for now, no one openly challenged their mission. Even lords like Dalton Moore quieted their talk of expansions. The realm, battered and rebuilding, had no appetite for new conflicts. Summer arrived with slow warmth, the first truly pleasant season in years. At the outpost, the buds on newly planted saplings unfurled, bright green under the gentler sun. The huts, woven from living branches, continued to bloom, forming a curious fusion of architecture and nature. Healed half-turned individuals often lingered for a while, helping with chores, forging friendships with watchers and children alike before moving on. Some even returned later, bringing gifts of supplies or game from their hunts. Small seeds of trust blossomed. Nailia found herself with more time to walk the forest paths. She would sometimes trek alone or with Rill, gathering herbs in meadows dappled by sunlight. She cherished these peaceful moments, recalling how for so long she had only known the forest as a place of caution, overshadowed by the threat of men or White Walkers. Now, for perhaps the first time, a cautious alliance thrived. The Watchers were respectful, the local villagers no longer prowled the forest with torches. Even so, she remained watchful. The night she glimpsed that final White Walker's shape near her bedroll lingered in her memory, a stark reminder that vigilance must never slacken completely. In late summer, Ihara visited the outpost. Though older and frilier than ever, she seemed content to see it thriving. The huts expanded to accommodate more patients without turning it into a fortress. She spoke quietly with Nailia about the cost of forging the dragon. It had drained the children's store of vital essence, leaving behind only scraps used in that final demonstration. Yet the beneficial side of that same forging was plain. Averix had not only broken the Night King's hold but also proved unstoppable when facing lesser White Walkers. The Weirwoods, Ihara said, sensed a time of healing. Perhaps in the centuries to come, the land would no longer fear an endless night. As that summer waned toward autumn, the nights grew cool, though nowhere near the lethal cold they had once endured. The outpost thrived as a modest sanctuary for any who carried leftover shadows of White Walker magic. Even those with ordinary ailments sometimes arrived, hoping the children might have cures unknown to maesters. The Watchers did their best to limit traffic, ensuring the place did not become a sprawling camp. Some lords sent small donations of grain or cloth, acknowledging the outpost's service. Nailia found it all surreal. After centuries of conflict between men and the children, here they were exchanging friendly gestures. Occasionally, men with more ambition would still appear, testing boundaries or hinting that the children might conjure more wonders. Each time, the Watchers or Farron gently reaffirmed that no further dragons would be forged, no deeper magics unleashed for mortal gain. Word had spread of the partial forging demonstration in Winterfell, and most realized the forest's primeval power was not something to trifle with. Nailia took comfort in seeing people live instead of die. She might pass the huts and witness a formerly half-turned woman laugh softly with a child of the forest who taught her how to weave living vines into baskets. She might see a hardened ranger sharing a bowl of stew with a villager he once would have mistrusted. The changes were small but tangible, proof that the alliance was more than a battlefield necessity. Perhaps it was the start of a lasting shift in how men and the children coexisted. Ehara once murmured that if the outpost endured beyond their lifetimes, it might become a legend of a different sort, a beacon of cooperation. Nailia clung to that hope. Still, challenges arose. Some half-turned individuals struggled to adapt after healing, racked by nightmares. A few displayed episodes of aggression as though part of the White Walker's frost remained in their psyche. The children developed new wards to calm such surges. Some Watchers found it unnerving, worried that a single slip might unleash a new wave of violence. But each time, the wards worked, gradually coaxing out the remnants of darkness. These episodes reminded them that the war's scars ran deep. True healing took time. One day, as autumn's leaves began to redden, a small caravan arrived at the outpost. It consisted of 4 wagons and a handful of guards carrying the Moor sigil. At its head rode a stern-faced older man on a sturdy black horse. Ser Jorund was with them, clearly subordinate to the older man. Word spread quickly that Lord Dalton Moor himself had come. The Watchers and children braced for potential trouble. Nailia, along with Farron, stepped outside the main enclosure to meet them. Averic circled overhead, as was now customary whenever armed strangers arrived. Lord Dalton Moor dismounted stiffly, lines of worry etched on his forehead. He wore a thick fur cloak despite the mild weather, and from his posture, Nailia sensed a man weighed down by personal burdens. His gaze traveled across the living huts, the Watchers, the clearing. Then he stepped forward, removing a gauntlet in a gesture of courtesy. "I come to beg your aid," he said, voice heavy with resignation. "My youngest son is in one of these wagons. The chill in his blood has grown worse. I fear he's nearly lost." Nailia nodded calmly, ignoring the anxious swirl in her stomach. "We will do what we can, my lord. Bring him inside." She looked to Farron, who gestured for Watchers to help. The wagons rolled in. The battered youth, perhaps no older than 10, was lifted out. His skin was shockingly pale, eyes half open, breath coming in shallow rasps. A faint rime of ice had formed around his temples. Maesters had apparently tried to slow the spread with heated compresses, but it was not enough. Lord Dalton hovered anxiously as the children took the boy to the main hut used for severe cases. Nailia, Celeria, and Rill hurried inside, preparing the healing wards. Ehara was not present at the outpost that day, so they had to manage without her. They lit braziers of special herbs. Nailia knelt by the boy, brushing the hair from his sweat-soaked brow. He stirred faintly, delirious. The ice around his temples cracked slightly at her touch. She inhaled, calling on the forest's warmth, readying for a deeper ritual. It might be like the day they saved Farron, but the boy was younger, more fragile, and had been afflicted for longer. Ser Jorund lingered at the threshold, gaze flicking between the Watchers and Lord Dalton, who paced like a caged animal. The hush was tense. The Watchers quietly reminded the Lord to remain respectful. Dalton Moor nodded curtly, restraining his fear. He had seen or heard enough stories of how these rites worked. He did not wish to sabotage his own child's chance of survival. Inside the hut, Nailia set to work. With Celeria's help, she formed a circle of runes on the earthen floor, sprinkling crushed rowan and ground dragonglass dust. She prepared a brew of potent herbs. Rill guarded the entrance from within, ensuring no one intruded. The boy's breathing grew ragged, ice flaring in his veins. Nailia's heart clenched at the sight. If they failed, the child would likely die by morning. They began chanting in the old tongue, calling upon the forest's flame that once forged the unstoppable dragon, albeit in a gentler form for healing. She placed her palms on the boy's chest, feeling the swirl of unholy cold locked in his blood. She coaxed the warmth forward, letting it flow from her core through her arms, a gentle glow that flickered in the dimness of the hut. The ice resisted at first, crackling as though trying to claw deeper into his heart. But Celeria chanted, intensifying the wards. Together, they surrounded that cold with pulses of living heat, bit by bit dissolving the frost that clung to his veins. The boy groaned, body twisting in pain, but Nailia steadied him, murmuring soothing words. She recalled how they had saved Farron by channeling the forest's essence into him while simultaneously expelling the White Walker's remnants. The difference was that Farron had a stronger adult constitution. This boy was so small, battered by months of creeping chill. If they pushed too hard, they might shatter his soul along with the ice. Hours passed. The watchers outside grew restless, though they dared not interfere. Lord Dalton demanded to know if the boy lived, and each time Ser Jorand quietly reassured him that the children required silence and space. The day waned, the sun drifting behind the pines. Inside the hut, sweat poured down Nailia's face, her arms shaking from maintaining the flow of warmth. Several times she nearly faltered, but Celeria propped her up, taking over part of the chant. Rill quietly placed a hand on Nailia's shoulder, lending moral support. Gradually, painfully, the frost receded from the boy's temples, the cracks in his skin slowly knitting closed. At last, near sunset, a final pulse of greenish glow flickered across the boy's chest. He exhaled, mouth slack, body going limp. Alarm stabbed Nailia. Had she pushed him too far? But then his chest rose again, a long, steady breath. Color returned to his cheeks, that horrible pallor melting away. The hush broke as Celeria let out a soft cry of relief, arms trembling. Nailia sagged to the floor, dizzy, gulping air. Rill pressed a water flask to her lips. The boy lay motionless but alive, eyes closed, no longer iced. Celeria, voice ragged, said they should watch him until morning, but it seemed they had removed the corruption. Nailia nodded weakly. She touched the child's brow. No trace of frost remained, only the warm dampness of sweat. She closed her eyes in a silent prayer of thanks to the forest. Another life saved. Outside, word spread that the boy had survived the ritual. Lord Dalton practically burst through the door, ignoring watchers who tried to restrain him. He froze at the sight of Nailia and Celeria, exhausted on the floor, the circle of runes half burned away. His gaze fell on his son, breathing normally at last. Tears of relief flooded his eyes. He stepped closer, kneeling with surprising gentleness. "How is he truly cured?" he rasped, voice breaking. Nailia summoned the strength to nod. "He'll need rest, but the cold is gone. Tend to him, keep him warm. No strenuous travel for a few days." She forced a small smile. "He should recover." Lord Dalton bent over his son, tears dripping onto the boy's face. "Thank you," he choked out, not turning around. "I owe you everything." Ser Jorn lingered at the doorway, also awed. The watchers quietly withdrew, giving them space. In the following days, the boy's recovery was swift. The deathly chill never returned. Lord Dalton could scarcely contain his gratitude, instructing his men to shower the outpost with supplies, grain, salted meats, fresh wool. He offered to build them better huts or sponsor the watchers with coin. Nailia gently but firmly declined any large expansions, reminding him of the outpost's balance with the forest. He accepted the refusal with as much grace as he could manage, though he pressed brand new tents and casks of provisions on them. She relented enough to accept the provisions, reasoning it might feed incoming patients for months. For a time, it seemed Lord Dalton might linger at the outpost, but eventually he recognized the place was not meant for extended visits by large retinues. He and his son departed with heartfelt thanks, the boy able to walk on his own, face bright with color. Some watchers wondered if Lord Dalton would proclaim the outpost's virtues, drawing more sufferers. Others worried that he might twist the story to his advantage. But for now at least, he left with genuine gratitude, leaving behind no trouble. Autumn leaves fell, carpeting the forest floor in gold and red. The outpost, though never large, had become a consistent presence, an odd melding of the children's traditions and the night's watch's discipline. Farron organized a small harvest festival one evening, inviting watchers, the newly healed, and the children to share a communal meal around the main hearth. It was a humble affair: dried meats, roasted roots, some foraged berries. The laughter filled the clearing, flickering lamplight dancing across smiling faces. For a brief time, no one spoke of White Walkers or curses. They simply enjoyed the gift of being alive in a land that had nearly perished. Nailia watched from a short distance, perched on a log beside Avarix. The dragon's presence drew stares, yet he was welcomed, an odd part of their family. She felt a rush of emotion swirling within her. In less than a year, they had gone from forging an impossible dragon to using its wards and the forest's magic to cleanse the realm of the Night King's final remnants, forging alliances with men. She felt both pride and a profound humility. The knowledge that all of this had come at great cost, centuries of the children's secrets, the forging that nearly drained them, never left her. But she also saw how many lives were spared by these efforts. That made it worth every risk. As the night wore on, songs rose. Some watchers sang ballads about the last battle at the wall. Others hummed older tunes from distant keeps. Celeria and Rill joined in with gentle harmonies in the old tongue. Farron introduced a new song he had written about hope blossoming from winter's gloom, referencing a certain forest dragon who guarded the gates of dawn. People chuckled softly, but the refrain was strangely moving. In that moment, the outpost felt like a pocket of warmth against the endless dark of the world. When the festival ended and most folk drifted to their huts, Nailia lingered by the dying embers of the fire. She gazed at the stars, her cloak pulled tight around her shoulders. A gentle breeze rustled the autumn leaves, carrying the faint scent of pine. She felt Rill's presence at her side before she saw him. "Could you have imagined any of this a year ago?" he asked softly. She shook her head. "I never thought the day would come when men and the children shared a feast. We were always so wary of them, and they saw us as myth. Now we stand together to heal the wounds left by the White Walkers." Rill nodded, eyes on the sky. "We should be proud. But a part of me still worries. Peace can be fragile. Men have short memories." Nailia exhaled, leaning into him. "True. Yet we've sown new seeds of trust. Even if some forget, others will remember that we fought side by side at the wall and that the forest welcomes them when the ice threatens. That must count for something." Rill smiled, letting the silence fill the gap. Above, the stars glittered, indifferent yet beautiful. Avarix dozed near the pine trees, his breath a soft rumble. Beyond that, the forest stretched into darkness, ancient and unbroken. And still the children watched, guardians of magic older than men's kingdoms. For now at least, the realm was safe from the threat of winter's unstoppable scourge. As the seasons turned, new challenges would arise, but so would new solutions. The forging of one incorruptible dragon had changed the balance forever, forging a path none had dared dream possible. At dawn, Nailia rose early, restless to see the forest in its autumn splendor. She walked alone through the tall pines, their needles thick underfoot, a hush in the crisp air. She reached a hillock that overlooked a swath of maples blazing in red and gold. Mist clung to the hollows, the sky above a pale wash of morning light. Perched on the crest of the hill, she felt the living heartbeat of the forest, how it pulsed through roots and branches, whispering old secrets of resilience. The weirwoods had survived countless ages, bearing witness to men's tragedies and triumphs. Now they had guided the children to an uneasy but precious friendship with men. Perhaps that was how they would endure centuries more. In the distance, the outpost's huts peaked above the treeline, joined to the living wood that made them. Smoke rose from a small cook fire, and she knew watchers would be waking, half-turned patience stirring, the day's tasks beginning. Maybe another traveler would arrive, seeking the forest's healing. Maybe a messenger from Winterfell would drop by, bearing news. Or maybe, for one quiet day, no one would come and they would simply breathe easy. Whatever the day brought, she would meet it with open heart and unwavering resolve. She turned, hearing a gentle rustle. Avarix landed behind her, his weight shaking the ground. He peered at her with glowing golden eyes, offering a low rumble that might have been a greeting. She approached, placing a hand on his bark-like scales. Warmth pulsed beneath, reminiscent of the power that had once blazed to destroy the Night King. Yet here, in the dawn light, that power felt more like a peaceful presence, protective rather than destructive. "Thank you," she whispered to him, though she knew the words alone could not express her gratitude. Together, they had faced unimaginable darkness and forged a fragile new age. If new threats rose, they would meet them the same way, with faith in the forest's living flame and in the alliances born of compassion rather than fear. As she stroked Avarix's scaled flank, she sensed the weirwood's faint murmur echoing in her mind. The old gods had not abandoned the world to winter's malice. Life, once nurtured, could stand against any cold. Nailia lingered there a while, letting the forest's hush wash over her. She closed her eyes, imagining the outpost, the watchers, the half-turned, the realm of men beyond, wondering if, centuries from now, all of this might exist in harmony rather than strife. The future was unknown, but hope flowed like a quiet stream beneath the leaves. With the unstoppable flame of a single dragon as guardian, with the children and men unwilling to let another long night descend, perhaps the promise of spring would forever linger in the land. And so, as the sun climbed higher, warming the last vestiges of morning chill, Nailia turned back toward the outpost, resolute in her vow to keep that fragile peace alive for as long as she drew breath.